The moment Claire Bennett whispered those Japanese words across the table, she knew her life would never be the same. $1 billion deal was about to explode. A silent widow was about to destroy 6 men with a single sentence, and a shy waitress carrying dirty plates was about to become the most dangerous person in Manhattan's most exclusive steakhouse. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. If you want to see how a woman everyone ignored brought an empire to its knees, stay until the end. Hit that like button and drop a comment with your city. I want to see how far this story travels. Let me take you back to where it all began. The rain came down like punishment that Tuesday night. Claire Bennett stood outside Monarch Steakhouse's service entrance, staring at her reflection in a puddle that had formed between cracked pavement stones. 29 years old, though some days she felt twice that. Her black server's uniform hung a little loose these days. She'd lost weight. Stress did that. Inside her apron pocket, her phone buzzed. She didn't need to look to know it was another medical bill. Her mother's treatments were bleeding her dry, $50 at a time, and the hospital didn't care that Claire was already working doubles 6 days a week. "Bennett, you coming in or you going to stand there till you drown?" Marcus, the head server, held the door open. Rain dripped from the awning onto his shoulder, but he didn't seem to notice. Marcus never noticed much beyond whether his section was turning tables fast enough. "Sorry," Claire mumbled, slipping past him. The kitchen hit her like a wall of heat and noise. Chefs shouting in 3 different languages, pans clattering, the acrid smell of something burning mixed with the rich aroma of beef and butter. She'd worked at Monarch for almost 2 years, and it still felt like walking into a war zone every shift. "You got table 7 tonight," Marcus said, not looking up from his seating chart. "Big reservation, private booth. They already called twice to confirm the wine list." Claire's stomach sank. Big reservations meant big egos. Big egos meant big problems. "How many?" 7, corporate types. One of them's Adrian Cole. Even Claire had heard that name. Adrian Cole. The billionaire who'd taken over his father's real estate empire and somehow tripled it before he turned 30. Magazines called him brilliant, ruthless, the kind of man who could buy buildings the way normal people bought coffee. "Great," Claire said, though nothing about this felt great. She tied her apron tighter and grabbed a pitcher of water. Through the kitchen's swing doors, she could see into the main dining room. Monarch wasn't just expensive, it was obscene. Crystal chandeliers that probably cost more than Claire would earn in a lifetime. Leather booths, the color of old money. The kind of place where a single steak could run $300, and people ordered it without blinking. Claire had learned to move through this world like a ghost. Invisible. Forgettable. That's what kept you safe when you served people who had enough money to ruin your life on a whim. "Water glasses," Marcus snapped. "Move." She moved. Table 7 sat in the back corner, the most private booth in the restaurant, tucked behind a decorative screen that gave the illusion of intimacy. 6 men had already arrived, sprawled across the leather seats like they owned them. Expensive suits, expensive watches, the kind of expensive that didn't bother trying to look humble. And one woman. She sat at the far end of the booth, pressed against the window. Small. Maybe 60, though it was hard to tell. She wore a simple black dress, elegant but understated. No jewelry except a thin gold wedding band. Her hands were folded in her lap, and she stared out at the rain-soaked street with an expression Claire couldn't quite read. Everyone else was ignoring her completely. "Gentlemen," Claire said quietly, approaching the table. "Welcome to Monarch. Can I start you with—" "Scotch," one of them interrupted. He didn't look at her. "Macallan 25, and keep it coming." "Of course, and for—" "Same for all of us," another man said. He was younger, maybe 40, with the kind of tan that came from Caribbean vacations, not honest work. "Except her." He jerked his thumb toward the woman by the window. "She doesn't drink. Probably doesn't even know what good scotch tastes like." The other men laughed. Claire's jaw tightened, but she kept her expression neutral. This was her job. Smile, nod, don't react. "I'll have water," the woman said softly. Her voice was gentle, accented. Japanese, Claire realized, with a small jolt of recognition. "Of course," Claire said, meeting the woman's eyes for just a second. There was something there. Sadness, maybe. Or resignation. The look of someone used to being underestimated. Claire knew that look. She saw it in the mirror every morning. She turned to leave, but another voice stopped her. "Wait." Adrian Cole had just walked in. Claire had seen photos, but they didn't quite capture him. Tall, dark hair going gray at the temples, even though he couldn't be older than his early 30s. Sharp suit, but his tie was slightly loose, like he'd been wearing it too long. There was something exhausted about him, something that went deeper than just a late night. He slid into the booth without smiling, without greeting anyone. Just pulled out his phone and started typing. "Adrian!" The tan man slapped the table. "Finally! We were starting to think you'd bail on us." "I'm here, Richard," Adrian said, not looking up. "Let's make this quick. I need to get home." "Come on, man. Live a little. When's the last time you actually enjoyed a meal?" Adrian's expression flickered, something dark passing behind his eyes. But he didn't answer. Claire retreated to the bar, her heart beating faster than it should. There was something wrong about that table. She couldn't put her finger on it, but the air around those men felt toxic. "Macallan 25, she told the bartender. 6 glasses. While he poured, Claire glanced back at table 7. The woman, she'd heard one of the men call her Emiko, was still staring out the window. Rain streaked down the glass like tears. And suddenly, Claire heard it, Japanese. 2 of the men were speaking Japanese to each other, laughing as they talked. Claire's pulse quickened. She'd spent 2 years in Kyoto right after college, a study abroad program that was supposed to launch her career in international business. Instead, she'd come home to her mother's cancer diagnosis and a mountain of debt that made dreams feel like luxuries she couldn't afford. But she'd kept the language, practiced it alone in her apartment, watched Japanese films with subtitles. It was the one beautiful thing left from a life she'd almost had, and now these men were using it as a weapon. "Doesn't understand a word we're saying," one of them said in Japanese, grinning. "Look at her face, completely blank. She's probably wondering why her husband was stupid enough to leave everything to her," the other one replied. "Women like this don't understand business. They just sign whatever their lawyers tell them to sign." They were talking about Emiko. Claire's hands shook as she carried the drinks back to the table. She set them down carefully, one by one, her mind racing. Should she say something? Should she warn this woman that she was sitting in a nest of snakes? But Claire had learned the hard way that speaking up in places like this didn't make you brave. It made you unemployed. "You're Scotch," she said quietly. Richard grabbed his glass without thanking her. "So, Emiko, you understand why we're all here tonight, right?" Emiko turned from the window slowly. She looked at Richard with calm, dark eyes. "You wish to discuss my late husband's company," she said in English. Her accent was thick, but her words were clear. "Exactly." Richard leaned forward. "See, we know this must be overwhelming for you. Running a billion-dollar robotics firm, that's not something most people can handle, especially someone without a background in technology." "I see," Emiko said. "So we want to help." Richard's smile was all teeth. "We're prepared to offer you a very generous buyout. You walk away with enough money to live comfortably for the rest of your life, and we take on the burden of managing the company. Everyone wins." Everyone except her, Claire thought bitterly. "How much?" Emiko asked simply. Richard named a figure that made Claire's head spin. $50 million. It sounded like a fortune. It probably was a fortune to normal people. But Claire had read about Tanaka Robotics in the news. The company was worth billions. This wasn't a generous offer. It was an insult wrapped in expensive paper. "I will consider," Emiko said quietly. The men exchanged glances, satisfied, like they'd already won. Adrian Cole finally looked up from his phone. "Maybe we should let Mrs. Tanaka consult with her advisors before—" "Adrian, relax," Richard interrupted. "This is just a conversation. Right, Emiko?" He said her name like she was a child. Emiko just nodded. Over the next hour, Claire watched the dinner devolve into something uglier. The scotch kept flowing. The men's voices grew louder, and their cruelty toward Emiko became more and more blatant. They talked over her. They laughed at her questions. They switched between English and Japanese, using the language barrier like a gate they could open and close at will. "Look at her clothes," one of them said in Japanese. "You'd think with all that money she could afford a decent dress." "Maybe she's saving it for her cats," another replied, and they all laughed. Emiko's expression never changed, but Claire saw her hands tighten in her lap. Claire brought out appetizers, oysters, caviar, beef tartare that cost more per bite than Claire made in an hour. She wanted to say something, wanted to tell these men that their cruelty was showing, that maybe the quiet woman at their table understood more than they realized, but she stayed silent, just like Adrian Cole stayed silent. She'd noticed that about him. He wasn't participating in the mockery, but he wasn't stopping it either. He sat at the edge of the booth, checking his phone, looking vaguely uncomfortable but ultimately doing nothing. Maybe that was worse, Claire thought. At least the others were honest about being terrible. "Another round?" she asked quietly. "Keep them coming, sweetheart," Richard said, not looking at her. Claire hated being called sweetheart by men who wouldn't remember her face tomorrow. She headed back to the bar, but paused behind the decorative screen when she heard her name, or at least what they thought was her name. "That waitress is hot in a sad kind of way," one of the men said. "You think she'd give me her number if I tipped big enough?" "Everything's for sale if you pay enough," Richard laughed. "That's what Adrian taught us, right?" Adrian's voice cut through. "Don't." "What? Come on, man, we're just—" "I said don't." Adrian's tone was flat, hard. "She's just doing her job." There was a beat of awkward silence. Then Richard shrugged. "Whatever. You've been weird since Jessica died anyway." Froze. Jessica. Adrian Cole's wife. She'd read about that too, a car accident 3 years ago that had left Adrian a widower with a young son. The tabloids had covered it for weeks. "Let's talk about the merger," Adrian said, his voice carefully controlled. The conversation shifted back to business, and Claire forced herself to keep moving. She had work to do, bills to pay. No time to feel sorry for billionaires, even tragic ones. But as the night wore on, something started to shift. It began with the food order. "We'll have the porterhouse," Richard announced. "Rare." "And what do you want, Emiko?" Emiko looked up from her water glass. For the first time that night she smiled, and then she spoke. In Japanese. Perfect, elegant, absolutely fluent Japanese. "I'll have the Kobe beef," she said. "Medium rare. And perhaps you could also bring me a side of your dignity, since you seem to have misplaced yours." The table went silent. Claire's heart stopped. Emiko had spoken so quickly, so naturally, that the men clearly hadn't understood her. They just stared, confused. But Claire had understood every single word. "I'm sorry," Richard said. "I don't—" Emiko switched back to English. "Kobe beef, medium rare." "Right, sure." Richard looked rattled. Did you just speak Japanese?" "My late husband was Japanese," Emiko said calmly. "I learned his language, to honor him." Another silence. Then one of the men, the one who'd been making the cruelest jokes all night, laughed nervously. "Well, that's great, really great." He wasn't smiling anymore. Claire stood frozen by the bar, her mind reeling. Emiko had understood everything, every insult, every cruel joke, every condescending comment, and she'd said nothing, until now. "Excuse me," Emiko said, raising her hand slightly. "Miss?" She was looking at Claire. Claire approached the table, her pulse hammering. "Yes, ma'am?" Emiko looked at her with those calm, dark eyes, and then, very quietly, she spoke again in Japanese. "You understand me, don't you?" The world tilted. Claire's mouth went dry. Every instinct screamed at her to lie, to play dumb, to protect herself the way she'd been protecting herself her entire life. But something in Emiko's eyes stopped her. It was the same look Claire saw in the mirror, the look of someone tired of being invisible. "Yes," Claire whispered back in Japanese. "I understand you." Emiko's smile widened, not a kind smile, something sharper. "Good," she said, "because I'm about to destroy these men, and I'd like you to translate." The men at the table shifted uncomfortably. They couldn't understand the words, but they understood the tone. Adrian Cole leaned forward slightly, his eyes moving between Emiko and Claire. "What's going on?" Richard demanded. Emiko folded her hands on the table. When she spoke again, it was in English, slow and deliberate. "I have a confession to make," she said. "I have not been entirely honest with you tonight." "What do you mean?" Richard's voice had an edge now. "I mean that I have understood every word you've said, in English and in Japanese." Emiko's voice was soft, but it cut through the noise of the restaurant like a knife. Every insult, every joke, every cruel comment about my clothes, my intelligence, my dead husband. The color drained from Richard's face. Now wait. I'm not finished, Emiko said, and the temperature at table 7 dropped 20 degrees. Claire stood perfectly still, barely breathing. She could see other diners starting to notice the commotion. Marcus was watching from across the room, frowning. You offered me $50 million for my husband's company, Emiko continued, a company currently valued at $3.2 billion. You assumed I was too stupid to know the difference. That's not… we were just… You also assumed, Emiko said, her voice growing colder, that I was merely my husband's widow, a woman who inherited wealth she didn't understand. She reached into her small purse and pulled out a business card, set it on the table. My name is Emiko Tanaka. I am the founder and CEO of Tanaka Global Holdings. We own 17 robotics companies across 4 continents. We also own significant shares in this restaurant. And your firm? Richard. Richard looked like he might be sick. In fact, Emiko continued, we own the building your firm operates in. We own the parking garage where you park your cars. We own the bank that holds your mortgages. She looked at each man in turn. You have spent the evening mocking someone who could buy your entire lives with pocket change. Adrian Cole sat frozen, his face unreadable. One of the other men tried to laugh. Look, this is clearly a misunderstanding. No, Emiko said simply. This is clarity. She turned to Claire, spoke in Japanese again. Would you please tell these men exactly what they said about me tonight? Word for word. Claire's hands were shaking. This was insane. She could lose her job. She could lose everything. But looking at Emiko, at this woman who'd sat in quiet dignity while men half her worth treated her like garbage, Claire found something she hadn't felt in a long time. Anger. She wants me to translate what you said, Claire said in English. Richard's eyes went wide. You speak Japanese. Yes. Claire's voice was stronger than she expected. You said Mrs. Tanaka was too stupid to understand business. You said she probably doesn't know what good scotch tastes like. You made jokes about her clothes, her age, her cats. With each word, the men seemed to shrink. You said women like her just sign whatever their lawyers tell them to sign. You called her husband stupid for leaving everything to her. Claire's voice cracked slightly on that last part. Emiko reached over and touched Claire's hand gently, just for a second. Thank you, she said in English. Then she pulled out her phone. I want all of you to take out your phones, Emiko said. Right now. They did, like children following a teacher's instructions. Good. Now check your email. The men fumbled with their screens, and one by one, their faces went white. What? Richard's voice came out as a whisper. What did you do? I sent a message to your board of directors, Emiko said calmly, with recordings of tonight's conversation. Your firm will be dissolved by morning. Your assets will be frozen pending investigation into fraud and corporate malfeasance. You can't. I already have. Emiko's smile was terrible and beautiful at the same time. The beauty of owning banks, Richard, is that I don't need permission to freeze accounts. I simply do it. Phones were buzzing now all around the table, messages flooding in. The men were reading them with expressions of growing horror. Marcus appeared at Claire's shoulder. Is everything all right here? No, Emiko said. These gentlemen were just leaving. We haven't even… Leave, Emiko repeated, and this time her voice carried weight that made even Marcus step back. The men scrambled out of the booth. Richard tried one last time. Adrian, say something. You're in this deal too. Bon. But Adrian Cole didn't move. He sat in the booth, staring at Emiko with something that might have been respect, or fear, or both. Mr. Cole, Emiko said quietly, you did not insult me tonight. Adrian exhaled slowly. But you said nothing while others did. And silence, Mr. Cole, is its own form of cruelty. Adrian's jaw tightened. He looked like he wanted to argue, to defend himself. Instead, he just nodded. You're right, he said. It was possibly the first honest thing Claire had heard all night. Go home to your son, Emiko said. Think about what kind of man you want him to become. Adrian stood slowly. He looked at Claire for a long moment, really looked at her, like he was seeing her for the first time. Then he walked away. The other men had already fled. The restaurant was staring. Marcus looked completely lost, and Emiko sat alone in the booth, calm as ever. "Miss," she said to Claire, "would you sit with me?" Claire's mind was spinning. I'm working. I can't." "Marcus," Emiko called. "I'm purchasing this young woman's time for the rest of the evening. How much?" Marcus blinked. What? "How much does she make in a night? I'll triple it." "Mrs. Tanaka," Claire started, "you don't have to—" "Sit," Emiko said gently. "Please." So Claire sat. The booth felt enormous with just the two of them. Outside, rain continued to fall, softer now. The dinner rush was winding down. Somewhere in the kitchen, chefs were cleaning stations, and Claire was sitting across from a woman who'd just destroyed 6 men without raising her voice. "You didn't have to do that," Claire said quietly. "Defend me. You could have just—" "Could have what?" Emiko asked. "Let them think I was helpless? Let them steal my husband's legacy?" "I meant standing up for me," Claire said. "The waitress." Emiko studied her. "What's your name?" "Claire. Claire Bennett." "Claire?" Emiko repeated. "Why do you work here?" "I need the money." Claire's laugh was bitter. "My mom's sick. Medical bills, student loans, the usual American dream. You studied in Japan." It wasn't a question. "How did you suss your accent?" Emiko said. "When you speak Japanese, it's Kyoto dialect. You studied there." Claire nodded. 2 years, best time of my life. Then I came home and life happened." "And now you're invisible," Emiko said. Claire felt tears prick her eyes. "I'm good at it." "You're wasted at it," Emiko corrected. She pulled out another business card, this one with Japanese characters. "I need someone I can trust, someone smart enough to understand complex situations, someone brave enough to speak truth even when it costs them." Claire stared at the card. "I don't understand." "Come work for me," Emiko said simply. "In Tokyo. Executive position, full benefits, salary that will cover your mother's medical care and then some." The world stopped. "You don't even know me," Claire whispered. "I know you understood what those men were saying, and you could have used it against me. You could have warned them, but you didn't. You chose kindness over opportunity," Emiko said. "That's rare, especially in my world." Claire's hands were shaking again. This couldn't be real. Things like this didn't happen to people like her. "I can't just leave my mom." "Bring her," Emiko said. "Tokyo has excellent medical facilities. I'll arrange everything." "This is crazy." "Yes," Emiko agreed, "but you're going to say yes anyway." And the terrible thing was, Claire knew she was right. She thought about her apartment with the broken heater, about Marcus's condescension, about customers who treated her like furniture, about the constant, crushing weight of knowing she was capable of so much more than this, but trapped by circumstances she couldn't control. "When?" Claire asked. Emiko smiled. A real smile this time. 2 weeks. That gives you time to prepare. That gives you—" They talked for another hour. Emiko ordered food that she actually ate. She told Claire about her late husband, about building an empire from nothing, about losing him too soon, about the loneliness of being powerful and underestimated at the same time. Claire told her about Kyoto, about her mother, about dreams she'd buried so deep she'd almost forgotten they existed. When Claire finally left Monarch that night, she walked past Marcus without a word, stepped out into the rain that had finally stopped. The city looked different somehow. Or maybe she was different. She pulled out her phone and looked at the business card Emiko had given her. Tanaka Global Holdings, executive assistant to the CEO. A new life, just sitting there in her hand. Behind her, through the restaurant window, she could see Emiko still sitting in the booth, making phone calls, probably destroying more men who'd underestimated her. Claire smiled. Then she started walking home, already planning everything she needed to do in the next 2 weeks. She didn't see the black car parked across the street, didn't see Adrian Cole sitting in the back seat, watching her disappear into the Manhattan night. He'd sat there for an hour, unable to make himself leave, unable to stop thinking about the quiet waitress who'd become the bravest person in the room. His phone buzzed, his son's nanny asking when he'd be home. Adrian looked at the message for a long moment, then he typed back, "On my way. Tell him I love him." And as his driver pulled away from Monarch, Adrian Cole made himself a promise. He'd been silent for too long. Starting tomorrow, that was going to change, even if he had no idea how much that decision would cost him, or how much it would save. Claire's apartment smelled like mildew and burnt coffee when she got home that night. The building super had promised to fix the leak in the bathroom 3 months ago, but promises didn't mean much in a place where the rent was cheap enough that nobody asked questions. She dropped her keys on the counter, the same counter where the laminate was peeling at the edges, and stood in the dark for a minute, just breathing. Her phone buzzed, a text from her mother. "How was work, sweetheart?" Claire stared at those 3 words. Her mother always asked, every single night, like Claire's job serving overpriced steaks to people who didn't see her was something worth discussing. She typed back, "Different, I'll call you tomorrow." Then she sat down on her secondhand couch and pulled out Emiko's business card again. The paper was thick, expensive, the kind of quality you could feel between your fingers. Tanaka Global Holdings, embossed in silver. A Tokyo address that probably looked out over the entire city. 2 weeks. 2 weeks to pack up a life she'd been trying to escape for years. 2 weeks to convince her mother to leave the only home she'd ever known. 2 weeks to figure out if she was brave enough to actually do this. Her hands were still shaking. She thought about Richard's face when Emiko had destroyed him, about the other men scrambling out of that booth like their clothes were on fire, about Adrian Cole sitting there in silence, looking at her like she was a puzzle he couldn't solve. That last part bothered her more than it should. Claire had learned not to think about men like Adrian Cole. They existed in a different atmosphere where money solved problems and loneliness was optional. They didn't notice waitresses except to leave tips that were either insultingly small or awkwardly large, both options designed to make them feel powerful. But Adrian had looked tired. Not rich person tired, the kind where they complained about jet lag and needing a vacation. Actually tired. The kind that lived in your bones and made getting out of bed feel like a negotiation. Claire knew that tired. She set the business card on her coffee table and stared at it until her vision blurred. Then she went to bed without bothering to eat dinner. The next morning, Marcus called her before her alarm went off. "We need to talk," he said. No greeting, no preamble. Claire's stomach dropped. About what? About last night. About whatever happened at table 7 that made our biggest investor walk out looking like someone shot his dog. "I just translated. I don't care what you did," Marcus cut her off. Mrs. Tanaka left a very generous tip and an even more generous donation to the restaurant. She also made it clear that you're not to be bothered by management for the next 2 weeks. Claire sat up in bed. "She what?" "You heard me." Marcus sounded annoyed. "I don't know what you did to impress her, but congratulations. You've got diplomatic immunity or something. Just show up for your shifts and try not to cause any more chaos." He hung up before she could respond. Claire stared at her phone. Emiko had protected her, had made sure Marcus couldn't fire her out of spite or confusion or whatever motivated Marcus to do anything. She'd thought 3 moves ahead while Claire was still processing move 1. That's what power looked like, Claire realized. Not yelling, not demanding, just rearranging the world so quietly that people didn't notice until it was already done. She got dressed and went to work. The next 2 weeks blurred together like a movie playing at the wrong speed. Claire worked her shifts at Monarch, smiling at customers who didn't smile back, carrying plates that cost more than her monthly rent. But everything felt temporary now. Like she was watching her own life from a distance. She called her mother on day 3. "Tokyo?" Her mother's voice went up an octave. "Claire, that's halfway around the world." "I know, Mom. And you'd just leave? Just like that?" Claire closed her eyes. She was sitting in the break room at Monarch, surrounded by the smell of industrial cleaner and old grease. "I'd take you with me. Emiko, Mrs. Tanaka, she's arranging everything. Better doctors, better treatment, a place for both of us." Silence on the other end. Then her mother laughed. Not a happy laugh. The kind that meant she was trying not to cry. "You've been taking care of me for 3 years, baby. Maybe it's time someone took care of you." "Mom, I'm saying yes," her mother interrupted. "Before you try to talk me out of it. Before I remember all the reasons this sounds crazy, I'm saying yes." Claire felt something crack open in her chest. Something that had been locked down tight for so long she'd forgotten it was there. "Okay," she whispered. "Okay." They talked for another hour, made lists, made plans. made promises that felt fragile and necessary. When Claire hung up, Marcus was standing in the doorway. "Your shift started 10 minutes ago," he said. "I know." Claire stood up, smoothed her apron. "I'm coming." But she wasn't sorry, and Marcus must have seen that in her face because he just turned and walked away. On day 7, Adrian Cole came back to Monarch. Claire was setting up her section when she saw him walk in. Same expensive suit, same exhausted eyes, but something was different. He wasn't with the other men, wasn't part of a group, just stood in the entrance looking lost. The hostess approached him, but he waved her off and walked straight to table 7, the booth where everything had happened. He sat down, pulled out his phone, stared at it without turning it on. Claire's heart was beating too fast. This was stupid. He probably didn't even remember her. Probably came here all the time and she'd just never noticed because rich people all looked the same after a while. But then he looked up, and their eyes met, and Claire knew he'd come here looking for her. She walked over slowly, like approaching a wild animal. "Can I get you something?" Adrian blinked, like he hadn't actually planned what to say. "Coffee, please." "Sure." She turned to leave, but his voice stopped her. "Wait, He ran a hand through his hair. "I'm sorry for the other night. I should have said something, should have stopped them." Claire's throat went tight. "You don't need to apologize to me." "I think I do." Adrian looked at her directly, really looked at her. "I've been thinking about that night. About how everyone at that table knew what was happening and only 2 people had the guts to do anything about it, and I wasn't one of them." "You also weren't insulting her." "No," Adrian agreed. "I was just letting it happen, which might be worse." Claire didn't know what to say to that. Didn't know how to tell this man she'd spent the last week trying not to think about him. "I'll get your coffee," she said finally. When she came back with a full mug, Adrian was staring out the window the same way Emiko had, like the rain-soaked streets held answers to questions he didn't know how to ask. "Black, right?" Claire set the cup down. Adrian looked surprised. "Yeah. How did you... You didn't touch the cream or sugar last time." Something shifted in his expression. "You notice things." "It's my job." "No," Adrian said quietly. "Your job is to bring food and smile at people who don't deserve it. Noticing is something else." Claire felt heat rise in her face. "I should..." "She offered you a job, didn't she?" Adrian interrupted. "Mrs. Tanaka." Claire froze. "How do you know that?" "Because that's what powerful people do when they find someone competent. They acquire them." Adrian took a sip of coffee. "Are you going to take it?" It wasn't really his business. Claire should have said something polite and walked away. Should have maintained the wall between servers and customers that kept everyone safe and separate. Instead, she said, "Yes." Adrian nodded slowly. "Good. You'd be wasted here." The words hit harder than they should have. "I need to get back to work." "Right, of course." Adrian pulled out his wallet, but Claire waved him off. "Coffee's on the house." "That's not..." "I insist," Claire said firmly. For a second, something almost like a smile crossed Adrian's face. "Okay." She walked away before he could say anything else, before she could think too hard about why her hands were shaking again. Adrian came back 3 more times that week, always alone, always to table 7, always ordering just coffee and sitting there like he was waiting for something he couldn't name. Claire served him without conversation. Just coffee, refilled before he had to ask. He left cash on the table every time, $20 for a $4 coffee, and never waited for change. On his last visit, the day before Claire's final shift, he left something else, a business card with a handwritten note on the back. "If Tokyo doesn't work out." AC Claire stared at it for a long time. Then she tucked it into her apron pocket next to Emiko's card. 2 versions of a future she'd never imagined, both impossible, both somehow real. Her last shift at Monarch was quieter than she expected. Marcus didn't make a speech. The other servers didn't throw her a party. She just worked her section, carried her trays, and watched the clock tick toward freedom. At the end of the night, she stood in the break room and looked at her locker. 3 years of her life crammed into a metal box. Pictures of her mom. A jacket she'd bought on sale and never worn. A half-empty bottle of ibuprofen that she'd gone through faster than she wanted to admit. She packed it all into a grocery bag and walked out. The city was quiet, cold, the kind of November night that promised winter was coming whether you were ready or not. Claire stood on the sidewalk and looked up at Monarch's lit windows, thought about all the nights she'd stood in this exact spot, dreading going in, dreading going home, just existing in the space between two places that didn't want her. Her phone buzzed. A message from Emiko. Car will pick you up at 6 a.m. Bring only what matters. Everything else will replace. Claire typed back, see you soon. Then she walked home through the empty streets, carrying everything she owned in a plastic bag, and felt lighter than she had in years. The flight to Tokyo was 17 hours. Claire had never been on a plane for more than 3, had never flown business class, where the seats turned into beds and flight attendants remembered your name, had never eaten food at 30,000 feet that actually tasted like food. Her mother slept most of the way, exhausted from the medications and the stress and the sheer weight of change. Claire held her hand across the armrest and watched clouds slide past the window. Somewhere over the Pacific Ocean, she thought about Adrian Cole, about his tired eyes, about the way he'd apologize like it cost him something, about the business card in her purse that she hadn't thrown away, even though she should have. She wondered if he thought about her. Probably not. Men like Adrian Cole didn't think about waitresses once they left the restaurant. They had bigger problems, bigger lives. Claire closed her eyes and tried to sleep. She dreamed about rain. Tokyo hit her like a wall of light and noise. The airport was massive, all glass and steel and moving parts. Signs in Japanese and English guided them through immigration, customs, baggage claim. Claire's mother looked overwhelmed, clutching her passport like it might escape. It's okay, Claire said in Japanese, then switched back to English. We're okay. A driver was waiting for them with a sign that read Bennett in neat block letters. He was young, professional, and spoke perfect English with a British accent that made Claire wonder about his story. Mrs. Tanaka is expecting you, he said, loading their bags into a black sedan that probably cost more than Claire's entire apartment building. The drive into the city was surreal. Neon signs advertising products Claire couldn't read. Buildings stacked on buildings like a game of vertical Tetris. People everywhere, moving with purpose, filling spaces that never seemed to empty. It's so big, her mother whispered. Claire squeezed her hand. Yeah. They pulled up to a high-rise that looked like something out of a science fiction film, all glass and sharp angles, reflecting the afternoon sun in ways that hurt to look at directly. The driver opened their door. Penthouse, Mrs. Tanaka is waiting. The elevator ride took forever and no time at all. Claire's ears popped as they rose higher and higher. Her mother gripped the railing like it was the only solid thing in the universe. The doors opened directly into an apartment. Not a hallway, not a lobby. Just straight into a space so large that Claire's entire New York apartment could have fit in the entryway. And standing in the middle of it was Emiko. She looked different here. Taller, maybe. Or just more herself. She wore a charcoal suit that probably cost more than Claire had made all year at Monarch, but she smiled like they were old friends meeting for coffee. Welcome, she said in English. Then to Claire's mother, Mrs. Bennett, I'm so pleased you agreed to come. Claire's mother looked stunned. Your apartment is 3 floors down, Emiko continued gently. Fully furnished. Medical care is already arranged. Dr. Sato is one of the best oncologists in Asia. He'll see you tomorrow morning. I can't possibly. You can, Emiko said simply. And you will. Claire needs you healthy. I need Claire focused. Everyone wins. She said it so matter-of-factly that arguing seemed pointless. The driver, whose name turned out to be James, showed Claire's mother to her new apartment. It was smaller than the penthouse, but still massive by any reasonable standard. 2 bedrooms, a kitchen with appliances Claire didn't recognize, windows overlooking the city that made everything look like a toy model of itself. Her mother started crying. Not sad crying, the other kind. The kind that happened when your brain couldn't process relief fast enough. I'll let you rest, Claire said quietly. Stay, her mother grabbed her hand. Just for a minute. So Claire stayed. They sat on the couch, new, expensive, still wrapped in protective plastic, and looked out at Tokyo. At this impossible city that was somehow their home now. Your father would have loved this, her mother said eventually. Claire's throat went tight. Her father had died when she was 12. Heart attack, no warning, just there one day and gone the next. Yeah, Claire managed. He would have. They sat in silence until her mother's breathing evened out, and she fell asleep right there on the couch. Claire covered her with a blanket she found in the bedroom closet, then took the elevator back up to the penthouse. Emiko was standing by the window, on the phone, speaking rapid Japanese that Claire only half followed. Something about quarterly reports and merger approvals and board meetings. When she hung up, she turned to Claire. Your mother settled? She's sleeping. Claire hesitated. I don't know how to thank you for this. Then don't, Emiko said. Thank me by being excellent at your job. That's all I ask. What exactly is my job? Emiko's smile was sharp. Right now? Learn everything. The company, the culture, the language of power in Tokyo. In 6 months, I want you running negotiations that men twice your age can't handle. That's impossible? Emiko raised an eyebrow. You learned Japanese in 2 years. You survived New York on a waitress salary while supporting your mother. You stood up to 6 men who could have ruined your life with a single phone call. Don't tell me what's impossible. Claire felt something shift in her chest, something that felt dangerously close to hope. Okay, she said. Good. Emiko checked her watch. Your first meeting is in 20 minutes. Go change. Your office is down the hall. James already put your things there. Claire blinked. Wait, what? Now? Why wait? Emiko was already heading toward her own office. The world doesn't pause while we catch our breath, Claire. We either keep up or we get left behind. Claire stood there for a second, jet-lagged and overwhelmed and completely out of her depth. Then she went to find her office. It was smaller than Emiko's, but still 3 times the size of her entire New York apartment. Floor-to-ceiling windows, a desk made of some dark wood she couldn't identify, a computer with monitors that curved in ways that seemed unnecessary but impressive, and hanging in the closet, 3 suits in her exact size. Claire stared at them. Emiko had planned this, had measured her somehow, maybe during their conversation at Monarch, had prepared everything down to the last detail before Claire even said yes. That was either terrifying or brilliant. Maybe both. Claire changed into one of the suits, charcoal gray, perfectly tailored, and looked at herself in the full-length mirror. She looked like someone else, someone who belonged in this office, in this building, in this life. The woman in the mirror stood straighter than the waitress from Monarch ever had. Claire decided she liked her. The meeting was with 3 executives from a German automotive company looking to license Tanaka's robotics technology. They were all men, all older, all clearly expecting someone other than Claire to walk into the conference room. She sat down across from them without apologizing for her age or her presence. Gentlemen, she said in perfect German, another language she'd picked up during a semester abroad that felt like a lifetime ago. Shall we begin? The looks on their faces almost made the entire 17-hour flight worth it. Emiko sat at the head of the table and said nothing, just watched, waiting to see if Claire would sink or swim. Claire swam. She negotiated. She pushed back. She found the holes in their proposal and exploited them without mercy. And when they tried to condescend to her, called her sweetheart in German, thinking she wouldn't understand the tone, she smiled and raised their licensing fee by 15%. By the end of the hour, they'd agreed to terms that heavily favored Tanaka Global. When they left, Emiko finally spoke. You speak German. 3 languages, actually, Claire said. 4 if you count English. You didn't mention that in your resume. I didn't have a resume. You offered me a job without one. Emiko laughed. Actually laughed. Fair point. She stood and walked to the window. Tokyo sprawled below them, endless and electric. Those men underestimated you, Emiko said quietly. People usually do. Good. Emiko turned to face her. Let them. It's a weapon we use until they learn better. We. Like they were the same. Like Claire belonged here. Why me? Claire asked suddenly. Really, you could have hired anyone, someone with an MBA, someone with experience. Emiko was quiet for a long moment. My husband used to say that competence is common, she finally said. Courage is rare. You had both. I was just translating. You were risking your livelihood to tell the truth, Emiko corrected. That's not common. That's essential. Claire didn't know what to say to that, so she said, I won't let you down. I know, Emiko said simply. And somehow, Claire believed her. The next 3 months were a blur of meetings, contracts, and late nights learning the architecture of an empire she'd never known existed. Claire absorbed everything, the company structure, the key players, the silent rules that governed billion-dollar negotiations. She learned that power in Tokyo was different than power in New York. Quieter, more subtle. A word spoken in the right moment could shift entire deals. Silence could be a threat or a blessing, depending on how you wielded it. Emiko taught her all of it. They worked 15-hour days, ate meals at their desks, traveled to Singapore, London, Berlin. Everywhere they went, Claire watched Emiko command rooms full of men who'd underestimated her right up until the moment she destroyed them. And slowly, Claire learned to do the same. Her mother's health improved under Dr. Sato's care. The treatments were aggressive but effective. Color returned to her face. Weight came back. She started exploring Tokyo, making friends with other expats, learning basic Japanese from a tutor Emiko had hired. You look different, her mother said one Sunday over lunch. Claire glanced up from her miso soup. Different how? Like you fit inside your own skin now. Claire thought about that. About the waitress who'd served table 7 6 months ago. About how small she'd made herself to survive. Maybe I do, she said. Her mother smiled. Good, you deserve it. But late at night, when Tokyo's neon glow filled her apartment and jet lag made sleep impossible, Claire would think about Manhattan, about Monarch, about Adrian Cole sitting alone in that booth, drinking coffee and looking lost. She'd pull out his business card sometimes, read the note on the back. If Tokyo doesn't work out. Stupid. Tokyo was working out better than she'd ever imagined, but she kept the card anyway. On a Thursday in March, Emiko called Claire into her office. We have a problem, she said without preamble. Claire sat down. What kind of problem? The New York kind. Emiko turned her computer screen around. Financial charts, stock projections, all trending downward. Adrian Cole's company is collapsing. Claire's stomach dropped. What? The scandal from our dinner destroyed several of his partnerships. His investors pulled out. Competitors are circling. Emiko leaned back in her chair. He's been trying to rebuild for months, but he's losing ground. Why are you telling me this? Because he's requested a meeting with Tanaka Global. Emiko's eyes were sharp. He's looking for financing. He needs someone to believe in him when no one else will. Claire's mind was racing. And I'm considering it, Emiko said. But I want your opinion. You were there that night. You saw him stay silent while his partners were cruel. Would you trust him with our money? It was a test. Claire knew it was a test, but it was also a real question. She thought about Adrian's face when he'd apologized. About how he'd come back to Monarch 4 times, just to sit in the booth where everything had changed. About the exhaustion in his eyes that spoke of someone trying to be better than he'd been. He was weak that night, Claire said slowly, but he knew it, and he spent every day since trying to fix it. That's not an answer. Yes, Claire said firmly. I'd trust him. Emiko studied her for a long moment. Then she smiled. Good, because I'm sending you to New York to negotiate with him. Claire's heart stopped. What? You know his history. You understand the context. And frankly, I want to see if he's learned anything. Emiko stood up. If he's still the man who stays silent while others are cruel, we walk away. If he's become someone better. She didn't finish the sentence. Claire swallowed hard. When do I leave? Tomorrow. James will have everything ready. That night, Claire stood in her Tokyo apartment and looked out at the city she'd come to love. She'd built a life here, found herself here, and now she was going back to the place she'd run from. Her phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. I heard you're coming to New York. I'm glad. AC Claire stared at the screen. Somehow, Adrian Cole had gotten her number. Somehow, he'd known she was coming before she'd even processed it herself. She should have been annoyed. Instead, she felt something that might have been anticipation. She typed back, "See you soon." Then she started packing for a trip that felt less like a business meeting and more like walking back into a story that wasn't finished yet. Outside her window, Tokyo glittered like a promise. And somewhere across the Pacific Ocean, Manhattan waited like an unresolved question. Claire had learned a lot in the past 6 months. But she was about to learn that some things, some people, you couldn't outrun just by changing continents. Manhattan looked smaller than Claire remembered. The plane touched down at JFK just after midnight, and by the time she cleared customs and found the car Emiko had arranged, the city was doing that thing it did between dark and dawn, emptying out just enough to feel almost manageable, almost quiet. James had stayed in Tokyo, but a new driver waited for her with a sign that read Tanaka Global. The woman was older, maybe 50, with gray streaks in her pulled-back hair and the kind of posture that suggested military background. "Ms. Bennett," she said. Not a question. "I'm Sarah. I'll be handling your ground transportation while you're here." Claire nodded, too tired to do more than follow her to the waiting sedan. The drive into Manhattan felt like rewinding a film she'd walked out of halfway through. Same bridges, same skyline, same streets that had once swallowed her whole without noticing. But Claire was different now. She wore a coat that actually fit, carried luggage that wasn't held together with duct tape, had a bank account that didn't send her into panic attacks every time she checked it. The car pulled up to a hotel in Midtown, not where she'd expected. Somewhere sleek and anonymous, all glass and steel, and the kind of luxury that didn't need to announce itself. "Mrs. Tanaka thought you'd prefer not to stay in your old neighborhood," Sarah said, reading Claire's expression in the rearview mirror. Claire almost laughed. Emiko had thought of everything. Again. She was right, Claire said. Her room was on the 32nd floor. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Central Park, which looked like a dark rectangle carved out of the city's light grid. The bed was massive. The bathroom had heated floors. Everything smelled like expensive soap and new beginnings. Claire dropped her bag and stood at the window for a long time. Somewhere out there was her old apartment with the broken heater. Somewhere was Monarch, still serving overpriced steaks to people who didn't deserve them. Somewhere was the version of herself she'd left behind. She wondered if Marcus still worked there. She wondered if anyone had noticed she was gone. Her phone buzzed. "Adrian. Breakfast tomorrow? I know a place." Claire stared at the message. It was 1 a.m. Normal people didn't text business contacts at 1 a.m. unless they couldn't sleep either. She typed back, "What time?" The response came immediately. 8. I'll send a car. I have a car. A pause. Then, right. Of course you do. Claire smiled despite herself. She sent him the hotel address and set her phone down. Then she tried to sleep and failed spectacularly. The restaurant Adrian chose wasn't what Claire expected. She'd assumed he'd pick somewhere expensive and obvious. One of those places where billionaires went to remind each other they were billionaires. Instead, Sarah pulled up to a small diner in the West Village that looked like it had been there since before either of them were born. Adrian was already waiting outside, hands in his coat pockets, breath fogging in the April cold. He looked different than she remembered. Thinner. The gray at his temples had spread. But something in his posture had changed, less of that defeated slump she'd seen at Monarch. He saw the sedan and straightened. Claire stepped out, and for a second neither of them said anything. "Hi," Adrian finally managed. "Hi." This was stupid. They were standing on a sidewalk in Manhattan staring at each other like teenagers who'd forgotten how conversations worked. "You look," Adrian started. "Different," Claire finished. "I know." "I was going to say good. You look good." Heat crept up Claire's neck. "Thanks." They went inside. The diner was exactly what it looked like. Red vinyl booze, checkered floors, a laminated menu that probably hadn't changed in 30 years. A waitress who looked about 70 brought them coffee without asking and called Adrian sweetheart, like she'd been doing it his whole life. "You come here a lot?" Claire asked. "Every Sunday with my son," Adrian said. "He likes their pancakes. Says they're better than the fancy places I try to take him." "Smart kid." "Too smart." Adrian smiled, but it was tired around the edges. "He sees through everything, asks questions I don't know how to answer." Claire wrapped her hands around her coffee mug. It was the cheap ceramic kind that probably came from a restaurant supply warehouse, but it was warm and solid and real. "How old is he now?" 9, almost 10. Adrian looked out the window at people walking past. He barely remembers his mother. Sometimes I catch him looking at photos like he's trying to remember something he's already lost. The pain in his voice was so raw that Claire had to look away. I'm sorry, she said. Everyone's sorry. Adrian's laugh was bitter. But sorry doesn't bring her back. Doesn't make me better at being both parents. Doesn't fix the fact that I buried myself in work for 3 years because I didn't know what else to do. The waitress came back. They ordered without looking at the menu. Claire got eggs and toast. Adrian got coffee refills and nothing else. When the waitress left, Claire leaned forward. Why did you want to meet here? She asked. This isn't a business breakfast spot. Adrian met her eyes. Because I didn't want to have a business breakfast. Adrian, I know you're here to evaluate whether Tanaka Global should invest in my company, he interrupted. I know this is about money and risk assessment and whether I'm a good bet. But before we do that, I need you to understand something. Claire waited. That night at Monarch changed my life, Adrian said quietly. Not because Emiko destroyed my business partners, though that certainly had consequences, but because I saw what silence looks like from the outside. I saw what happens when you choose comfort over courage. You came back 4 times, Claire said before she could stop herself. Adrian blinked. You remember that. You left $20 tips on $4 coffees. Kind of memorable. I kept trying to figure out what to say to you. How to apologize for being the kind of man who watches bad things happen and does nothing. You apologized the first time. Words are cheap. Adrian's hands were wrapped around his own coffee mug now, knuckles white. I needed to show you I was different, that I'd learned. But then you disappeared, and I thought I'd lost my chance. Claire's throat felt tight. I didn't disappear. I moved continents. Same thing from where I was sitting. They sat in silence for a minute. Around them, the diner was filling up with morning people. Construction workers grabbing coffee before shifts, students nursing hangovers, old couples who'd probably been coming here since before Claire was born. Why are you really here? Adrian asked finally. Emiko sent me. I know what the official reason is. What's your reason? Claire thought about that. About the business card she'd kept for 6 months. About the way Adrian's apology had sounded genuine in a world where most apologies were just social lubricant. I wanted to see if you meant it, she said. The apology? The change. Adrian nodded slowly. And? What's your assessment so far? Incomplete, Claire said. You haven't told me anything about your company yet. Right. Adrian pulled out his phone. Do you want the rehearsed pitch or the honest version? Is there a difference? The rehearsed version makes me sound like I know what I'm doing. The honest version admits I'm barely keeping the lights on. Claire almost smiled. Honest version, then. So Adrian told her. Told her about the partnerships that had collapsed after the Monarch scandal. About investors who'd pulled out overnight, spooked by association with Richard and the others. About competitors who'd smelled blood and started circling, offering his best employees twice their salaries to jump ship. I've lost 40% of my staff in 6 months, Adrian said. The ones who stayed are either loyal or desperate, and I'm not sure which is worse. What are you offering them? Equity. The promise that if we survive this, they'll own a piece of something worth having. And if you don't survive? Adrian's smile was grim. Then we all learn a valuable lesson about betting on sinking ships. The food arrived. Claire's eggs were overcooked and her toast was burnt on one side, but somehow it was better than half the meals she'd eaten at Monarch. Why should Tanaka Global invest in you? She asked, cutting into her eggs. Honestly, you shouldn't. Adrian still wasn't eating. I'm a bad bet right now. My company's hemorrhaging money. My reputation is shot. I've got about 6 months before I have to start laying people off or selling assets just to make payroll. That's a terrible pitch. I told you I'd be honest. Claire set down her fork. So why did you ask for this meeting? Because Emiko Tanaka is the only person I know who understands that sometimes the best investments aren't the safe ones. They're the necessary ones. Necessary how? Adrian leaned forward. My company builds adaptive infrastructure for developing cities, water purification systems, renewable energy grids, housing that can withstand climate disasters. We're not making weapons or luxury goods or another app that solves problems nobody has. That's admirable, Claire said carefully. But admirable doesn't pay dividends. No, Adrian agreed, but it matters. And I think Emiko cares about things that matter. He wasn't wrong. Claire had spent 6 months watching Emiko turn down deals that would have made billions because they involved industries she found morally bankrupt. Had watched her invest in projects that barely broke even because they solved problems worth solving. "What do you need?" Claire asked. "200 million, 18 months to restructure, and someone who believes I'm not the man I was 6 months ago." Claire did the math in her head. 200 million was significant but not devastating for Tanaka Global. 18 months was aggressive but achievable if Adrian actually knew what he was doing. The belief part was harder to quantify. "I'll need to see your books," she said. "All of them. I want to know where every dollar is going." "Done. I'll need to interview your remaining staff. Understand why they stayed. I'll set it up. And I need complete transparency. If you're lying about anything, if I find out you've hidden debts or bad contracts or anything else, the deal's off and you'll never get another meeting with Tanaka Global." Adrian extended his hand across the table. "Deal." Claire shook it. His grip was firm, desperate maybe, but honest. They spent the next 2 hours going over preliminary numbers. Adrian had brought his laptop, and they spread out in the booth like it was an office, going through spreadsheets and projections while the diner filled and emptied around them. The numbers were bad. Worse than Adrian had made them sound, but they weren't catastrophic. Claire could see the bones of something salvageable if they cut the right things and doubled down on the right projects. It would hurt. People would lose jobs. Some divisions would have to close. But it was possible. "You're going to have to fire your VP of operations," Claire said, pointing to a particularly damning expense report. Adrian winced. "Tom's been with me since the beginning." "Tom's been embezzling since the beginning, looks like." "That's—" Adrian pulled the laptop closer, studied the numbers Claire was highlighting. His face went pale. "Oh, you didn't know?" "I trusted him." "That was a mistake," Claire said, not unkindly. "Trust is expensive. Verify everything." Adrian closed the laptop slowly. "This is going to get worse before it gets better, isn't it?" "Significantly worse. You're going to have to make decisions that hurt people you care about. You're going to have to choose between loyalty and survival." "And you think I should choose survival?" Claire thought about her old apartment, about bills she couldn't pay and dreams she'd buried, about what survival cost when you were out of options. "I think you should choose honesty," she said. "Tell Tom what you found. Give him a chance to explain. But if he can't, if he's been stealing from you, then you need to cut him loose before he takes everyone else down with him." "That's cold." "That's business." Claire stood up, gathering her things. "If you want a friend, get a dog. If you want to save your company, make hard choices." Adrian looked up at her. "Is that what Emiko taught you?" "Emiko taught me that kindness without accountability is just weakness in disguise." She left cash on the table for her breakfast and walked toward the door. Adrian caught up with her on the sidewalk. "When do I get your decision?" he asked. "When I'm ready to give it." "Claire," she turned, "you asked me to believe you'd changed. Prove it. Show me you can make the hard calls. Show me you're not just the guy who stays silent while bad things happen." Something shifted in Adrian's expression. "How long do I have?" 3 days? I'll tour your offices tomorrow, interview your staff the day after. Then I'm flying back to Tokyo with my recommendation." "And if you recommend against investing?" Claire met his eyes. "Then you'll have 6 months to figure out another plan. But Adrian, if I recommend against it, it's because you didn't deserve the investment, not because I didn't want you to succeed." He nodded slowly. "Fair enough." Sarah pulled up in the sedan and Claire moved toward it, but Adrian's voice stopped her one more time. "I meant what I said earlier, about that night changing my life." Claire turned back. "I know. Do you?" "Because I don't think you understand how many times I've replayed that conversation in my head. How many times I've wished I'd been braver, better. Wishing doesn't change anything." "No," Adrian agreed. "But actions do. And I'm going to spend the next 3 days showing you that I'm not the man I was." Claire didn't respond, just got in the car and let Sarah drive her away. But as Manhattan blurred past the window, she realized her hands were shaking again. Not from fear this time. From something else entirely. The next morning, Claire stood outside Adrian Cole's office building and tried not to compare it to Tanaka Global's Tokyo headquarters. It was smaller, older. The lobby had that slightly worn quality that came from decades of use without quite enough maintenance budget, but it was functional, real. Adrian met her in the lobby himself instead of sending an assistant. "Ready?" he asked. "Let's go." He took her through every floor, showed her the engineering labs where his people designed water filtration systems for villages in sub-Saharan Africa. The design studios where architects drafted affordable housing that could withstand Category 5 hurricanes. The testing facilities where prototypes got pushed to their breaking points. Everyone they passed looked tired, but they also looked determined. "How many people total?" Claire asked. 237 as of this morning, Adrian said, down from 406 months ago. The ones who left, did they go to competitors? Mostly. A few started their own firms. One group went to work for the UN. Do you resent them for leaving? Adrian was quiet for a moment. I did at first, felt betrayed, but then I realized they were just protecting themselves. Can't fault people for choosing stability over loyalty to a sinking ship. They stopped outside the engineering lab. Through the glass, Claire could see a team of 3 people hunched over a prototype that looked like a cross between a water heater and a spaceship component. That's the Mark 7 purification system, Adrian said. If it works, it could provide clean water to communities of up to 5,000 people for under $10,000 per unit. What's the current market rate? Triple that. And our version is solar-powered, so no ongoing energy costs. Claire studied the engineers. They were young, passionate, the kind of people who'd chosen this work because they believed in it, not because it paid well. If you have to lay off more people, Claire said quietly, do you cut engineering first or operations? Adrian's jaw tightened. That's not a hypothetical, is it? No. Operations, he said after a long pause. The engineers are the only reason we have a chance at survival. Everything else is just support structure. Even Tom, especially Tom, apparently. Adrian's voice was bitter. I confronted him this morning. He admitted to the embezzlement, said he needed the money for his daughter's medical bills. Claire's chest tightened. Did you believe him? Does it matter? He still stole from a company that's barely surviving. Adrian ran a hand through his hair. I gave him until Friday to resign. If he doesn't, I'll fire him and press charges. That must have been hard. Hardest thing I've done since Jessica died. Adrian looked at her. But you were right. Kindness without accountability is just weakness. They continued the tour. Claire met department heads, reviewed project timelines, asked questions that made people uncomfortable. She was looking for cracks, for places where Adrian's vision didn't match reality, for the gaps between what he wanted to build and what was actually buildable. She found some, not as many as she expected. By lunch, they were back in Adrian's office, a corner space with windows that looked out over the city, but furniture that had seen better decades. You don't spend much on yourself, Claire observed. Can't justify it when I'm asking people to take pay cuts. Adrian gestured to the worn chairs. Besides, the view is the same whether the desk is new or 30 years old. They ordered sandwiches from a deli down the street, ate them while going through more spreadsheets, more projections, more scenarios where the company survived or died based on decisions that hadn't been made yet. Your marketing budget is almost nothing, Claire said. Can't afford marketing when we can barely afford operations. You need to afford it. Best product in the world doesn't matter if nobody knows it exists. So what do you suggest? Claire thought about it. Cut another 10% from operations. Use that money to hire a small marketing team. Focus on impact stories. Show the villages getting clean water, the communities surviving storms in your housing. Make it real for people. That means more layoffs. Yes. Adrian set down his sandwich. You're asking me to hurt people now to maybe help different people later. I'm asking you to choose between slow death and painful survival. You don't get a third option. They stared at each other across the desk. Then Adrian's phone rang. He glanced at the screen and his entire expression changed. I need to take this, he said. It's my son's school. Claire nodded and Adrian stepped out into the hallway. She sat alone in his office looking at the photos on his desk. Adrian with a little boy who had his eyes. Adrian with a woman who must have been Jessica, dark hair, bright smile, the kind of face that photographs kept alive long after the person was gone. The door opened and Adrian came back in. He looked shaken. Everything okay? Claire asked. No, that was... Adrian sat down heavily. My son's been in a fight. I need to go pick him up. Of course, we can finish this later. Come with me. Claire blinked. What? Come with me to get him. Please, Adrian looked lost. I don't want to do this alone. It was inappropriate, unprofessional. Claire should have said no. Instead, she said, okay. They took Adrian's car, a sedan that was nice but not ostentatious, the kind of vehicle that said money without screaming it. He drove in silence, knuckles white on the steering wheel. What happened? Claire asked. Another kid said something about his mother. My son punched him. How bad? Bad enough that the school wants both parents to come in. Except there's only one parent. Adrian's laugh was hollow. Story of his life. The school was on the Upper East Side, private, expensive, the kind of place that prepared kids for Ivy League futures. They were escorted to the principal's office by a secretary who looked at them like they were disappointing her personally. Adrian's son sat in a chair outside the office, small and furious. He had a split lip and his shirt was torn. When he saw Adrian, his expression crumbled. Dad, we'll talk about it, Adrian said quietly. But first we need to hear what happened. The principal was a woman in her 60s with glasses and zero patience for violence. She explained the situation in clipped tones. Adrian's son had attacked another student without provocation, caused injuries requiring medical attention, and would be suspended for 3 days pending a disciplinary hearing. Without provocation? Adrian's voice was hard. What did the other kids say? That's irrelevant, Mr. Cole. The hell it is. My son doesn't just attack people. The principal's expression didn't change. Language, Mr. Cole. Claire watched Adrian struggle to control himself, watched him take a breath and try a different approach. I apologize, he said carefully. But I need to understand what provoked this. My son is 9 years old. If another child said something hurtful enough to cause this reaction, that context matters. The other student made a comment about your son's family situation. It was unkind but not unusual for children this age. What did he say? Adrian's voice was dangerously quiet. The principal sighed. He said that your son's mother probably left because even she couldn't stand him. The silence that followed was devastating. Adrian's son was crying now, trying to hide it and failing, and Adrian looked like someone had punched him in the chest. Claire stood up before she consciously decided to. That's not unkind, she said, her voice cutting through the room. That's cruelty. And if your school's policy is to punish children for defending themselves against emotional abuse while the abusers go unpunished, then maybe the problem isn't the fight. Maybe the problem is the environment that made the fight inevitable. The principal turned to her. And you are? Claire Bennett. She glanced at Adrian. A friend of the family. Ms. Bennett, I appreciate your concern, but this is a school matter. Then handle it like one, Claire said. Don't sit there and tell a child that the words used to hurt him are irrelevant. Don't punish a 9-year-old for having a human reaction to inhuman cruelty. Adrian was staring at her. So was his son. The principal's expression had gone cold. The suspension stands, Mr. Cole. 3 days. If you'd like to discuss our disciplinary policies, we can schedule a separate meeting with the board. Adrian stood. Come on, buddy. Let's go home. His son grabbed his backpack and followed them out. They made it to the car before Adrian's son started sobbing for real. Not the quiet crying from before. Full, wrenching sobs that shook his whole body. Adrian pulled him into a hug right there in the parking lot, and Claire stood a few feet away, feeling like an intruder but unable to leave. I'm sorry, the boy kept saying. I'm so sorry, Dad. You have nothing to apologize for, Adrian said fiercely. Nothing. Do you understand me? But I hit him. He deserved it. Adrian pulled back to look his son in the eye. What he said about your mother was wrong, and you were right to defend her memory. The principal said, the principal is wrong too. Sometimes adults are wrong, sometimes the rules are wrong, and sometimes doing the right thing means breaking the rules. Claire's throat felt tight. Adrian's son finally noticed her. Who's that? This is Claire, Adrian said. She's someone who helped me remember how to stand up for people when it matters. The boy wiped his eyes. Did you used to not stand up for people? Adrian's smile was sad. Yeah, buddy, I did. But but I'm trying to be better. Okay. The boy studied Claire. Thanks for yelling at the principal. That was cool. Claire laughed despite everything. You're welcome. They drove back to Adrian's apartment in Tribeca, a place that was nice but not excessive, filled with toys and photos and the comfortable chaos of a single parent raising a kid alone. Adrian's son, whose name was Matthew, went to his room to change. Adrian stood in the kitchen looking lost. I should go, Claire said. Give you two some time. Stay, Adrian said. Please. I'll make coffee. We can finish going over the numbers. Adrian, you just picked your son up from school for fighting. You don't need to— I need the distraction, he interrupted. I need to focus on something other than the fact that my 9-year-old is dealing with grief I don't know how to help him process. Claire recognized that desperation, had felt it herself often enough. Okay, she said quietly. They sat at Adrian's kitchen table, scratched wood, mismatched chairs, and went through more spreadsheets while Matthew played video games in the other room. But Claire couldn't focus. She kept thinking about the principal's face, about the casual cruelty of children and the institutional indifference to it, about Adrian holding his son in a parking lot and promising to be better. You didn't have to do that, Adrian said suddenly. Do what? Defend Matthew. You barely know us. Claire thought about being a waitress everyone ignored, about Emiko sitting in silence while men mocked her, about the 1,000 small cruelties that added up to a life spent invisible. Someone needed to, she said. Adrian was quiet for a long moment. Then, I'm starting to understand why Emiko chose you. Because I yell at principals? Because you see people. Really see them, even when it would be easier not to. Claire looked away. The numbers— Forget the numbers for a second. Adrian leaned forward. Can I ask you something? Depends on the question. Why did you keep my business card? Claire's heart stuttered. Who says I did? You're here, aren't you? Emiko could have sent anyone, but she sent you. She sent me because I was at that dinner, because I have context. She sent you because she knew I'd asked for you specifically. The air in the kitchen felt suddenly thin. That's presumptuous, Claire managed. Maybe, but I don't think I'm wrong. He wasn't wrong. Claire had kept his card for 6 months, had looked at it on nights when Tokyo felt too big and New York felt too small, had wondered what might have happened if she'd called him instead of flying halfway around the world. This is inappropriate, she said. I know. I'm here to evaluate your company, not whatever this is. I know that too. Adrian's eyes were steady. But I also know that I've thought about you every day for 6 months, and I think maybe you've thought about me too. Claire stood up. I need to go. Claire, I'll send you my preliminary report tomorrow. We can schedule the staff interviews after that. She was at the door before Adrian caught up with her. I'm sorry, he said. I shouldn't have— No, Claire agreed. You shouldn't have? But she didn't leave. They stood in his doorway, close enough that Claire could count the gray hairs at his temples, could see the exhaustion in his eyes that went bone deep. I'm a bad investment, Adrian said quietly. Professionally and personally. My company's dying. My son is traumatized. I don't sleep. I don't know what I'm doing most days. And I definitely don't have any business asking you to care about any of that. Then why are you? Claire whispered. Because 6 months ago, a waitress I barely knew risked her job to tell the truth when no one else would, and I haven't been able to stop wondering what kind of person does that, what kind of courage that takes. It wasn't courage. I was just translating. You were standing up when everyone else sat down, including me. Adrian's voice cracked slightly. And I keep thinking that if I could learn even a fraction of that bravery, maybe I could fix the mess I've made of everything. Claire should have left, should have maintained professional distance, should have remembered that she was here on business and nothing else. Instead, she said, You're already braver than you think. Then she left before either of them could make it more complicated than it already was. Sarah was waiting in the car downstairs. She took one look at Claire's face and didn't ask questions, just drove. Back at the hotel, Claire stood at the window and watched the city lights blur. Her phone buzzed. A message from Emiko. How is the evaluation proceeding? Claire stared at the question. The honest answer was too complicated for a text message. The professional answer was incomplete. She typed, thorough, We'll have full report in 48 hours. Emiko's response came immediately. And the man? Is he different than he was? Claire closed her eyes. Yes, he's different. Or maybe I am. I can't tell anymore. A long pause, then, that sounds promising and dangerous. Which part? Both. Claire set her phone down and went to bed. But sleep didn't come. She lay in the dark and thought about Adrian's face when he'd held his son, about the way he'd apologized for feelings he couldn't control, about the business card she still had in her wallet, even though she should have thrown it away months ago. Tomorrow, she'd interview his staff, would make her final assessment, would decide whether Tanaka Global should bet $200 million on a man who was either brilliantly honest or honestly broken. But tonight, in a hotel room 32 floors above Manhattan, Claire Bennett admitted something she'd been avoiding for 6 months. She wanted him to succeed, not because of the numbers, not because of the business case, because she'd seen him try to be better. And in a world full of people who stayed exactly who they were, that meant something, even if it shouldn't, even if it was going to make everything so much harder than it needed to be. The staff interviews started at 9 the next morning in a conference room that smelled like burnt coffee and desperation. Claire had requested meetings with 15 employees across all departments, people Adrian's HR director identified as key players, people who'd stayed when they could have left for better opportunities elsewhere. She wanted to understand what kept them here when the smart money said, run. The first interview was with a woman named Dr. Sarah Chen, head of the Water Purification Division. She was maybe 40, with streaks of premature gray and the kind of intensity that came from caring too much about things most people never thought about. Why are you still here? Claire asked after the preliminary introductions. Sarah didn't hesitate. Because the work matters. That's not an answer. Lots of work matters. You could do meaningful work somewhere that actually pays on time. Sarah's smile was tired. You've done your homework. That's my job. Fair enough. Sarah leaned back in her chair. I stayed because Adrian came to my office 3 months ago and told me he understood if I needed to leave. Said he couldn't promise stability or even regular paychecks anymore. But then he asked me one question. Claire waited. He asked if I remembered why I got into this field in the first place. And I do. I remember being 12 years old, watching a news report about a cholera outbreak in Haiti, watching children die from drinking contaminated water. I remember thinking that shouldn't happen. That in a world with our resources and technology, no kid should die because they're thirsty. Sarah's voice had gone quiet, but fierce. Adrian reminded me that we're 3 months away from finalizing the Mark 7. That if it works, when it works, we could deploy units to 12 communities by year end. That's 60,000 people with access to clean water who don't have it now. And if the company folds before you finish, then I'll have tried and failed, which is better than not trying at all. Sarah met Claire's eyes. Look, I don't know what you're really asking, but if you want to know whether Adrian Cole is worth investing in, the answer is yes. Not because his business plan is perfect. It's not. Not because he's some genius entrepreneur. He's learning as he goes. But because he actually gives a damn about something other than profit margins. Claire made notes, asked follow-up questions about project timelines, budget constraints, technical challenges. Sarah answered all of them with the kind of detail that suggested she'd been living and breathing this work for years. When the interview ended, Sarah paused at the door. Can I say something off the record? Sure. He's different since his wife died, more serious, more driven, but also more fragile, like he's holding himself together with duct tape and willpower. Sarah's expression softened. Whatever happened 6 months ago changed him again. He came back from that dinner at Monarch and started actually talking to people, started asking questions, started admitting when he didn't know things. You think that's a good change? I think it's the only thing keeping this company alive. The next interview was with Tom Wallace, the VP of Operations Adrian had confronted about embezzlement. He looked like he hadn't slept in days. His suit was rumpled and his eyes were red-rimmed. I already resigned, Tom said before Claire could start. Effective Friday. So I don't know what you want from me. I want to understand why you stayed as long as you did. Tom laughed bitterly. You mean before I started stealing? Yeah, before that. He was quiet for a long moment, staring at his hands. My daughter has cystic fibrosis, he said finally. Treatment runs about $300,000 a year. Insurance covers some of it, but not enough. Not nearly enough. Claire felt her stomach twist. Adrian knew. Gave me a raise 2 years ago when he found out, even though the company couldn't really afford it. Told me family came first. Tom's voice cracked. And I repaid that by stealing from him when he needed loyalty most. How much did you take? $140,000 over 6 months. Funneled through vendor invoices, expense reports. I was careful. Not careful enough, apparently. Why not just ask for help? Tom looked at her like she'd suggested flying to the moon. Ask my boss for more money while the company's dying? While people are getting laid off? What kind of person does that? The honest kind, Claire said. Yeah, well, I wasn't honest. I was desperate. Tom stood up. You want my assessment of Adrian Cole? He's a better man than I am. He had every right to press charges, destroy my career, make sure I never work in this industry again. Instead, he's letting me resign quietly. Gave me 3 months severance to help with medical bills. That's who he is. That's generous? That's stupid, Tom corrected. He can't afford to be generous right now. But he's doing it anyway because he can't help being decent, even when it costs him. After Tom left, Claire sat alone in the conference room for 10 minutes. The air conditioning was broken and the room was too warm. Outside the window, she could see people on the street below, moving through their lives without knowing that decisions being made in rooms like this one would ripple out in ways they'd never see. She thought about her mother's medical bills, about the choices you make when someone you love is sick, and the numbers don't add up, and desperation starts looking like the only rational response. She thought about Adrian letting Tom walk away with severance he couldn't afford. Then she went to the next interview. By lunch, Claire had talked to 12 people. Engineers, designers, operations staff, even the receptionist who'd been with the company since Adrian's father founded it 30 years ago. The pattern was consistent. Nobody stayed for the money. The salaries were below market rate and getting worse. Nobody stayed for job security. Half of them were actively updating their resumes just in case. They stayed because Adrian had convinced them they were building something worth building, because he'd created a culture where the work mattered more than the profits. Because even while his company circled the drain, he'd managed to make people believe that failure trying to do something meaningful was better than success doing something empty. It was either inspiring or insane. Claire couldn't decide which. She was writing up notes when her phone rang. Adrian. How's it going? He asked. Your people are either incredibly loyal or incredibly naive. Can it be both? Probably is. Claire closed her laptop. I'm finishing up the last few interviews this afternoon. Then I need a day to compile everything before I report back to Emiko. So you're leaving tomorrow. Day after, early morning flight. Silence on the other end. Then Adrian said, Can I buy you dinner tonight? Actual dinner, not a business meeting disguised as food. Adrian, I know this is complicated and inappropriate and probably a terrible idea, but you're leaving in 36 hours, and I don't know if I'll ever see you again, and He stopped, started over. I'd like to have dinner with you, as two people, not as investor and supplicant, just once. Claire should have said no, should have maintained professional boundaries, should have remembered that she was here to evaluate his company, not get tangled up in whatever this was becoming. Where? She asked instead. Monarch. Claire's breath caught. You're joking. I'm not. Table 7, 8 o'clock. I already made the reservation. That's full circle, Adrian finished. I know. Claire thought about that booth, about Emiko destroying 6 men without raising her voice, about translating cruelty and finding courage she didn't know she had. Okay, she said quietly. Okay? 8 o'clock. Don't be late. She hung up before he could respond. Then she sat there trying to figure out what she'd just agreed to. The last interview of the day was with Matthew's nanny, a woman named Rosa who'd been with Adrian's family since Matthew was a baby. Claire hadn't requested this interview. Rosa had asked for it. They met in a coffee shop near Adrian's apartment instead of the office. Rosa was maybe 60, with warm eyes and hands that moved when she talked. You're the woman from yesterday, Rosa said. The one who yelled at the principal. I didn't yell. Matthew said you did. He thinks you're cool. Rosa smiled. He doesn't think many people are cool. He seems like a good kid. He's a scared kid who's learned to hide it well. Rosa stirred sugar into her coffee. His mother died when he was 6. Old enough to remember her, but too young to understand why she's gone. And his father, Adrian, tries, but he doesn't know how to be both parents, doesn't know how to be home when Matthew needs him, and at work saving the company, so he ends up failing at both. That's harsh. That's honest. Rosa looked at Claire directly. I'm not here to talk about the company. I don't understand business, but I understand that little boy, and I understand his father, and I think you might be able to help them. I'm just here to evaluate. You're here because Emiko Tanaka sent you specifically, because Adrian asked for you specifically, because something happened 6 months ago that changed how he sees the world. Rosa leaned forward. I've worked for that family for 9 years. I watched Adrian shut down after Jessica died. Watched him build walls so high that even his own son couldn't reach him sometimes. Claire's throat felt tight. And then 6 months ago, something shifted. He started coming home earlier, started asking Matthew about school instead of just nodding while working on his phone. Started trying. Rosa's eyes were fierce now. I don't know what you did or said that night at Monarch, but it woke something up in him, made him remember he's still alive even though his wife isn't. Rosa, I'm not asking you to fix him. Nobody can fix another person, but I'm asking you to see him, really see him, not just the business case or the investment risk. See the man who's trying so damn hard to be better than he was. Claire didn't know what to say to that. Rosa stood up. He's a good man who's had a bad few years, and I think maybe you understand what that's like. She left before Claire could respond. Claire sat in the coffee shop for another hour, staring at her notes without reading them. Everything was getting too complicated. She was supposed to be evaluating a business opportunity, not psychoanalyzing a widower or bonding with his son or having nannies tell her she could save people. She couldn't save people. She could barely save herself most days. Her phone buzzed. A message from her mother in Tokyo. How's New York? Do you miss it? Claire looked out the window at the street she used to walk every day. At the city that had chewed her up and spit her out until Emiko had offered her a way out. She typed, Not as much as I expected. How are you feeling? Good. Dr. Sato says the new treatment is working. I might actually beat this thing. Claire felt tears prick her eyes. You will. You're the strongest person I know. I learned from you, sweetheart. Claire set her phone down and let herself cry for a minute in a coffee shop full of strangers. Then she pulled herself together and went back to the hotel to finish her report. Monarch looked exactly the same as it had 6 months ago. Same crystal chandeliers, same leather booths, same air of expensive exclusivity that made Claire feel like an imposter, even though she could now afford to eat here every night if she wanted. She'd dressed carefully, a navy dress that was professional but not corporate, elegant but not trying too hard. The kind of outfit that said she belonged here without announcing how hard she'd fought to get here. Adrian was already waiting at table 7. He stood when she approached, and Claire saw he'd dressed up too. Dark suit, no tie, hair actually combed instead of the disheveled mess it usually was. Hi, he said. Hi. They sat down across from each other in the booth where everything had started. The silence was awkward until their waiter arrived, Marcus, of all people. He clearly recognized Claire but didn't show it beyond a slight widening of his eyes. Good evening, he said smoothly. Can I start you with drinks? Scotch, Adrian said. Macallan, 25. Marcus's expression flickered with something that might have been irony. Then he looked at Claire. Water, she said. Still, no ice. When Marcus left, Adrian laughed. What? Claire asked. You ordered exactly what Emiko ordered that night. Did I? Claire hadn't realized. Guess some things stick. They ordered food without really looking at the menu. The prices were still obscene. The steaks were still probably amazing. None of it seemed to matter. Your staff loves you, Claire said once the ordering was done. They pity me. It's not pity. They believe in what you're building. Adrian looked uncomfortable. Did Tom talk to you? Yeah. And? And he thinks you're too decent for your own good. He stole from me. Because his daughter is dying and he was desperate. Claire leaned forward. You gave him severance. Why? Because I can't save his daughter, but I can help with the bills. And because firing someone at their lowest point without offering them a rope to climb back up makes me exactly the kind of man I'm trying not to be. Claire studied his face. That's going to hurt your company. I know. It might cost you employees you can't afford to lose. I know that too. And you're doing it anyway. Yeah. Adrian met her eyes. I'm doing it anyway. The food arrived. They ate in silence for a while, the weight of 6 months and 3,000 miles sitting between them. Finally, Adrian set down his fork. I need to tell you something, he said. Claire's stomach flipped. Okay. That night, the night with Emiko, I went home and couldn't sleep. Kept replaying the whole dinner. Kept seeing your face when you started translating. You looked terrified, but you did it anyway. I was terrified. I know. That's what made it brave. Adrian's hands were wrapped around his scotch glass, and I kept thinking about how I'd sat there in silence, how I'd let those men be cruel because standing up to them felt too hard, too risky. Adrian, let me finish, please. He took a breath. I realized I'd been silent for 3 years. Since Jessica died, I'd just been going through motions, working, parenting, existing, but not actually living, not actually standing up for anything that mattered. Claire's throat was tight. You reminded me that silence is a choice, and I'd been choosing it every day without realizing the cost. I didn't do anything special. You did everything special, Adrian said quietly. You showed me what courage looks like when it doesn't announce itself. When it's just a waitress risking her job to tell the truth, because truth matters more than safety. Claire had to look away. So when you disappeared, when I came back to Monarch and you were gone, I thought I'd lost my chance to say thank you, to tell you that you changed my life. I moved to Tokyo. I didn't disappear into thin air. Same thing from where I was sitting. Adrian's smile was sad. But then Emiko agreed to meet with me. And when I asked if she could send someone who understood context, who'd been there that night, she said she'd send her best person. She sent me because I'm competent. She sent you because she knew I'd asked for you. The restaurant noise seemed to fade, the clink of silverware, the murmur of conversation, all of it distant. Why? Claire whispered. Why what? Why me? You barely know me. I brought you coffee 4 times and translated 1 conversation. That's not enough to build whatever this is. Adrian was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, My wife died on a Tuesday. Claire's breath caught. She was driving home from her sister's house. Rainy night, bad visibility. A truck ran a red light. Adrian's voice was carefully controlled. They said she died instantly. Like that's supposed to make it better. Adrian, you don't have to. I need you to understand something. For 3 years, I've been half alive, going through the motions, being a father because Matthew needed me to be, but not really being present, not really being anything except numb. He looked at her directly. And then you translated that conversation. And for the first time in 3 years, I felt something other than numb. I felt ashamed, angry at myself, aware that I'd become someone Jessica wouldn't have respected. Claire felt tears threatening. So when I ask why this is why. Because you woke me up when I'd forgotten I was sleeping. Because you reminded me that the world still has people in it worth knowing, worth trying for. I can't be that person, Claire said. I can't be the thing that fixes you. I'm not asking you to fix me. I'm just asking you to see me, the way I see you. The waiter, Marcus, appeared to refill water glasses. His timing was either impeccable or terrible. When he left again, Claire said, I'm going back to Tokyo in 36 hours. I know. And I'm going to recommend that Tanaka Global invest in your company. Adrian blinked. You are. Yeah, you're a good risk. Not a safe one, but a good one. Your people believe in you. Your work matters. And you're honest enough to admit when you're drowning instead of pretending you're swimming. Claire. But, she continued, that's all this can be. A business relationship. Because anything else is too complicated, and I've worked too hard to build a life in Tokyo to risk it on something that probably won't work. Probably, Adrian repeated. Not definitely. Definitely enough. They finished dinner in heavy silence. When the bill came, Adrian paid it without looking at the total. They walked out of Monarch into a Manhattan night that was warmer than it should be for April. Can I walk you back to your hotel? Adrian asked. It's 15 blocks. I know. So they walked. Past streets Claire used to know. Past her old apartment building, which looked even more run down than she remembered. past the coffee shop where she'd sometimes treat herself to a latte when tips were good. Adrian didn't try to fill the silence with conversation, just walked beside her, hands in his pockets, occasionally glancing over like he was making sure she was still there. At the hotel entrance, they stopped. "Thank you for dinner," Claire said. "Thank you for the investment recommendation." "Don't thank me yet. Emiko makes the final call." "But you're recommending it. That means everything." Claire knew she should go inside, should end this conversation before it became something neither of them could walk back from. Instead, she said, "Matthew's a good kid. He likes you. Won't stop talking about how you yelled at his principal." "I didn't yell." "You absolutely yelled," Adrian smiled. "He wants to know if you'll come to his birthday party next month." "I'll be in Tokyo." "I know. I told him that. He said maybe you could video call." Claire's chest felt tight. "Maybe." They stood there in the April warmth, two people who'd met in completely the wrong circumstances at completely the wrong time. "I'm going to miss you," Adrian said quietly. "You don't know me well enough to miss me." Doesn't make it less true. Claire felt something break open inside her chest, something she'd been keeping carefully locked down for 6 months. "I kept your business card," she admitted, "the one you left at Monarch. I kept it in my wallet even though I should have thrown it away." Adrian's expression shifted. "Why?" "Because I kept thinking about what you said, about being the kind of man who stays silent, and I wanted to believe you could change, that people could change. And now? Now I think you already have, and it scares me how much I want to see where that leads." Adrian took a step closer. "What if I came to Tokyo?" "What?" "What if I came to Tokyo? Not right away, but eventually. Once the company stabilizes. Once Matthew's a bit older. What if I—" "Stop," Claire interrupted. "Don't make promises you can't keep." "I'm not. I'm asking a question. If I came to Tokyo, if I tried to build something with you, would you want that?" Claire's heart was racing. "This is crazy. That's not an answer. We barely know each other." Still not an answer. Claire looked at him. Really looked at him. At the exhaustion in his eyes that was fighting with something that looked dangerously like hope. At the gray in his hair that spoke of years she hadn't been part of. At the way he was holding himself together with visible effort. "Ask me again in 6 months," she said finally. 6 months? "Yeah, if you still want to ask the question in 6 months. If your company survives and Matthew's doing okay and you haven't realized this was just grief and loneliness talking, then ask me again." Adrian nodded slowly. "Okay. Okay? 6 months. I'll ask again." Claire turned to go inside, but Adrian caught her hand. "For what it's worth," he said, "I don't think this is grief talking. I think this is the first time in 3 years I've actually felt alive." Then he let go and walked away into the Manhattan night. Claire stood in the hotel lobby for 5 minutes, watching him disappear down the street. Then she went upstairs and called Emiko. "It's late," Emiko said by way of greeting. "I know, I'm sorry, but I need to give you my recommendation." "I'm listening." Claire took a breath. "Invest in coal industries. 200 million, 18-month term, with quarterly reviews and strict oversight. He's a good risk." "You sound certain." "I am." "And the man himself?" Claire closed her eyes. "He's different than he was. Better, I think. Or trying to be, which might be the same thing." Emiko was quiet for a moment, then, "You like him." "That's not relevant to the investment." "Of course it's relevant. I'm not asking as your boss. I'm asking as someone who cares about you." Claire felt her throat tighten. "Yeah, I like him, which is inconvenient and probably stupid." "Why stupid?" "Because I live in Tokyo, and he lives here, and his company is barely surviving, and he has a 9-year-old son who needs stability, not his father chasing after someone who served him coffee 6 times. You think that's all this is? Coffee and translation?" "I don't know what it is. That's the problem." Emiko's voice softened. "When I met my husband, he was a junior engineer and I was inheriting a company I didn't know how to run. Everyone said it was a terrible match, that we came from different worlds, that it would never work." Claire waited. "They were right. It was difficult. We fought constantly those first few years, but we also built something worth building. And when he died, I didn't regret a single difficult moment. What are you saying? I'm saying that worth and easy are not the same thing, and you're smart enough to know the difference. They talked for another 20 minutes about logistics, terms, implementation plans, but when they hung up, Claire stood at the window looking out at Manhattan and thinking about everything Emiko hadn't said directly, about courage and risk, about building things worth building even when they were hard, about the difference between running toward something and running away. Her phone buzzed, a text from Adrian. Thank you for everything. Claire stared at the message for a long time. Then she typed, 6 months. Don't forget, I won't. She set her phone down and tried to sleep, but all night she kept thinking about a man walking away down a Manhattan street, about a little boy who thought yelling at principals was cool, about a company full of people who stayed because the work mattered more than the paycheck, about what 6 months might look like if everyone involved was brave enough to see where it led. Morning came too fast. Claire packed her bag, checked out of the hotel, and let Sarah drive her to JFK. The city looked different in daylight, softer somehow, less harsh than she remembered. Or maybe she was different. At the airport, she checked her phone one last time before boarding. A message from Matthew. Thanks for yelling at my principal. My dad says you're going back to Tokyo, but maybe you'll visit sometime? Claire smiled despite everything. She typed back, maybe. Take care of your dad for me. The response came immediately. Okay, he needs it. Then Claire boarded a plane that would carry her back across the Pacific to the life she'd built, to the city that had given her everything Manhattan couldn't, to a future that was supposed to be clear and uncomplicated. But as the plane lifted off and New York became a grid of lights below her, Claire Bennett admitted something she'd been avoiding since the moment Adrian Cole had walked into that diner asking for coffee. 6 months felt like forever, and she had no idea if either of them would make it that long without combusting or giving up or forgetting why any of this had mattered in the first place. But for the first time in a long time, she was willing to find out, even if it scared her. Especially because it scared her. Tokyo welcomed Claire back with humidity and neon and the kind of crowds that made Manhattan look empty by comparison. She went straight from the airport to the office, jet-lagged and disoriented, carrying her luggage because stopping at her apartment felt like admitting she was too tired to work. Emiko was waiting in the conference room with 3 lawyers and a stack of contracts that would either save Adrian Cole's company or expose just how badly Claire had miscalculated. You look terrible, Emiko said without preamble. 17-hour flight will do that. Sit. We have work to do. They spent the next 6 hours going through every detail of the investment terms. The lawyers asked questions Claire had anticipated and several she hadn't. They wanted guarantees she couldn't give, assurances that required trust instead of data. This is a significant risk, one of the lawyers said. He was young, ambitious, the kind of person who saw every decision as a potential career killer. Coal Industries is hemorrhaging money. Their projections are optimistic at best. I know, Claire said. Then why are we doing this? Claire looked at Emiko, who was watching her with those calm, dark eyes that missed nothing. Because some investments aren't about guaranteed returns, Claire said slowly. They're about betting on people who are trying to build something that matters, and sometimes that's worth more than safe money. The lawyer looked skeptical. Emiko looked satisfied. Draw up the contracts, Emiko told the lawyers. We're moving forward. When they filed out, Emiko stayed behind. You're in love with him, she said. Not a question. Claire's stomach dropped. That's not... I barely know him. You know him well enough to risk my money on him, well enough to look like you haven't slept since you left New York, well enough to keep checking your phone every 5 minutes like you're waiting for a message. Claire hadn't realized she'd been checking her phone that often. It's complicated, she managed. It always is. Emiko stood, gathering her papers. For what it's worth, I think you made the right call. On the investment and the man. How can you know that? Because 6 months ago you were invisible. You'd made yourself so small that even you had forgotten what you were capable of. Emiko paused at the door. And now you're negotiating billion-dollar deals and yelling at school principals and falling for men who scare you because they make you feel things you thought you'd buried. That's not regression. That's growth. She left before Claire could respond. Claire sat alone in the conference room, surrounded by contracts and water glasses, and the distant hum of Tokyo beyond the windows. Her phone buzzed. Adrian, did Emiko approve the investment? Claire, contracts are being drawn up now. Should be finalized within a week. A pause. Then, thank you. You're saving my company. Don't thank me yet. You still have to actually save it. Right, no pressure. Claire smiled despite her exhaustion. How's Matthew? Good. Still suspended, but he's reading a lot. Says he wants to learn Japanese so he can talk to you without me translating. Something twisted in Claire's chest. Tell him I said he doesn't need to learn Japanese. English works fine. I'll tell him. But I think he's going to learn it anyway. He's stubborn like that. Wonder where he gets it from. His mother, definitely. I'm very easygoing. Claire actually laughed out loud in the empty conference room. They texted for another 20 minutes about nothing important. Matthew's reading list, the weather in New York versus Tokyo, whether the Mark 7 water purification system would actually work or explode spectacularly. It felt normal, easy, like they'd been doing this for years instead of days. When Claire finally made it home to her apartment, her mother was waiting with tea and concern. You look exhausted, her mother said. Everyone keeps saying that, because it's true. Her mother poured tea into delicate cups that Emiko had given them. How was New York? Claire thought about how to answer that. About dinners at Monarch and walking 15 blocks in the dark and a 9-year-old who wanted to learn Japanese. Complicated, she said finally. The investment or the man? Claire looked up sharply. How did you? Sweetheart, I'm sick, not blind. You've been different since you got back. Distracted. Your phone keeps buzzing and you keep smiling at it when you think I'm not looking. Claire set down her tea. It's nothing, just complicated. You said that already. Her mother reached across the table and took Claire's hand. Tell me about him. So Claire did. Told her about Adrian sitting in that booth at Monarch, silent while his partners were cruel. About him coming back 4 times for coffee. About his son and his dying company and the way he'd apologized like it cost him something real. He asked if I'd want him to come to Tokyo, Claire said quietly. Eventually, when things stabilize. And what did you say? That he should ask again in 6 months, if he still wants to. Her mother was quiet for a long moment, steam rising from her tea. Your father proposed to me after knowing me for 3 weeks, she said finally. Claire blinked. What? 3 weeks? Everyone said we were crazy, that it would never work, that we were too young and too different and too everything. Her mother's smile was sad. They were right about some of it. We fought constantly those first few years, struggled with money, struggled with your father's family, who thought I wasn't good enough. I didn't know that, because by the time you were old enough to notice, we'd figured it out, built something worth keeping. Her mother squeezed Claire's hand. My point is, there's no such thing as the right time. There's just the time you have and what you choose to do with it. He lives in New York. I live here. He has a son who needs stability. So you figure it out. Or you don't. But don't pretend the logistics are the real problem. What's the real problem? Her mother looked at her with eyes that had watched Claire grow up, struggle, survive. You're scared, she said gently. Scared of wanting something this much. Scared of it not working out. Scared of being the kind of happy that makes you vulnerable. Claire felt tears threatening. What if I mess it up? Then you mess it up, and you survive. Like you've survived everything else. Her mother stood, kissed the top of Claire's head. But hiding in Tokyo because you're scared of what might happen in New York isn't surviving. It's just existing, and you deserve better than that. The weeks blurred together after that. Claire threw herself into work, managing the coal industry's investment like her life depended on it. Conference calls at odd hours because of the time difference. Detailed reports on cash flow and project milestones. Weekly meetings with Adrian's team to make sure they were hitting targets. Adrian sent her updates constantly. Photos of the Mark 7 in testing. Spreadsheets showing improved efficiency. A video of the first prototype being deployed to a village in Kenya where children lined up to drink clean water for the first time in their lives. This is because of you, he texted with the video. None of this happens without Tanaka Global's investment. Claire watched the video 3 times, watching those kids' faces light up with something as simple and profound as safe water. This is because of your team, she typed back. I just signed the paperwork. You did more than that. You believed in us when no one else would. Claire didn't know how to respond to that, so she sent back a simple, "Don't waste it. I won't. I promise." Matthew texted her too, which was unexpected and oddly sweet. He'd send her photos of things he found interesting, weird bugs, cool buildings, a pigeon that had nested on their fire escape. Then he'd ask her questions about Tokyo, about Japanese culture, about whether she thought he could be an engineer when he grew up. "You can be whatever you work hard enough to become," Claire told him. "That's what my dad says too, but he also says hard work isn't always enough, that sometimes you need luck. Your dad's right, but you make your own luck by showing up every day and trying." Did you make your own luck? Claire stared at that question for a long time. "I got lucky when someone saw something in me I couldn't see in myself, and then I worked hard to prove they were right. Was it my dad who saw it?" "No, it was someone else. But your dad helped me see it too." She didn't hear back after that for a few hours. Then late at night Tokyo time. "I'm glad he did. You're cool." Claire fell asleep smiling at her phone like a teenager. 3 months passed. Coal industries stabilized slowly and painfully. They hit most of their targets, missed a few, recovered from setbacks that would have killed them 6 months earlier. The Mark 7 went into production. Adrian laid off another 20 people, but managed to keep the core team intact. Claire watched it all from across the Pacific, feeling simultaneously essential and completely disconnected from the actual work. Emiko noticed, of course. "You're restless," she said one afternoon in her office. "I'm fine. You're checking your phone every 5 minutes and sighing at financial reports. That's not fine." Claire set down the report she'd been pretending to read. "I miss it." "Miss what?" "The work, being there, watching the pieces come together in real time instead of reading about it in updates." "You miss him," Emiko corrected. "That too." Emiko leaned back in her chair. "So go." "What?" "Go to New York. We have an office there. You could run operations from Manhattan just as easily as Tokyo." Claire's heart stuttered. "You're serious?" "I don't joke about business decisions." Emiko pulled up something on her computer. "Our New York office is small but functional. They could use someone with your expertise, and it would give you more direct oversight of the coal investment." "That's not why you're suggesting this." "No," Emiko agreed. "I'm suggesting it because you've been half present for 3 months. And I need you fully present or fully gone." "That's harsh. That's honest." Emiko's expression softened slightly. "You saved my dignity that night at Monarch. Let me return the favor by saving you from making the same mistake I did." "What mistake?" "Choosing safety over happiness. After my husband died, I threw myself into work. Built an empire because building a life felt too hard. And I don't regret the empire, but I do regret the years I spent alone when I could have been with people who mattered." Claire felt her throat tighten. "What if it doesn't work? What if I move to New York and it all falls apart? Then you'll have tried, which is more than most people can say." Emiko closed her laptop. "Think about it, but don't think too long. Opportunities have expiration dates." That night, Claire stood at her apartment window looking out at Tokyo, at the city that had saved her when she was drowning, at the life she'd built from nothing but borrowed courage and stubbornness. Her mother appeared beside her, wrapped in a robe, looking healthier than she had in years. "You're thinking about New York," her mother said. "How do you always know?" "Because you get that same look your father used to get when he was trying to solve a problem that didn't have an easy answer." Claire smiled despite everything. "What would you do?" "I'd stop asking other people what they do and ask myself what I actually want." "What if I don't know?" "You know." Her mother squeezed her shoulder. "You're just scared of admitting it because admitting it means you have to do something about it." Claire leaned her head against her mother's shoulder, like she was 12 again and the world was simpler. "I want to go to New York," she whispered. "I want to see if this thing with Adrian is real. I want to watch Matthew learn Japanese. I want to be there when the Mark 7 launches instead of reading about it in reports." "Then go." "What about you?" "I'm coming with you, obviously." Her mother laughed. "You think I'm letting you run off to New York without me?" "I've gotten used to having you around." "Dr. Sato has colleagues in New York who are just as good. We already discussed it." Her mother pulled back to look Claire in the eye. "I'm not your excuse anymore, sweetheart. If you want to stay in Tokyo, stay, but don't stay because you think I need you to. Claire felt something break loose in her chest, something she'd been holding onto for so long she'd forgotten it was there. I'm scared, she admitted. Good. Scared means it matters. The next morning, Claire walked into Emiko's office and said, I want the New York position. Emiko didn't look surprised. When can you start? 2 weeks? 1 month. I need you to train your replacement here first. Emiko extended her hand. Welcome to New York, Claire. They shook on it. Then Emiko said, Have you told him yet? No, I wanted to make sure it was real first. Smart. Men make terrible decisions when they think they're getting what they want, Claire laughed. Should I be worried about that? Probably, but that's half the fun. Claire waited until that evening to text Adrian. Her hands were shaking when she typed, Can we video call? I have news. The response came within seconds. Give me 5 minutes. When the call connected, Adrian's face filled her screen. He looked tired but happy, sitting in what looked like his home office with Matthew's drawings visible on the wall behind him. Hey, he said. Hey. They stared at each other across 9,000 miles and 13 time zones. You said you have news, Adrian prompted. Claire took a breath. Emiko's transferring me to the New York office. I'll be running Tanaka Global's North American operations and providing direct oversight for the coal industry's investment. Adrian's expression went completely still. You're moving to New York? In a month, yeah. For how long? Indefinitely, at least a year, maybe longer, depending on... She didn't get to finish because Adrian started laughing. Not polite laughing, the kind that came from somewhere deep and uncontrollable. What? Claire asked. I bought a plane ticket to Tokyo this morning. Claire blinked. What? I was going to surprise you. Fly out next month. Tell you I'd waited 6 months like you asked. And I was ready to ask the question again. Adrian was still laughing. And you're moving here. Is that okay? Okay? Claire, it's... Adrian ran a hand through his hair. It's the best thing I've heard in 3 years. Something warm bloomed in Claire's chest. Matthew's going to lose his mind, Adrian continued. He's been studying Japanese for 3 months. Keeps telling me he's going to impress you when you visit. He's learning Japanese? Told you he was stubborn. They talked for 2 hours. About logistics and housing and whether Claire's mother would need help finding doctors in New York. About Matthew's upcoming birthday and the Mark 7 launch and 1,000 small details that suddenly mattered because they were building towards something real. When they finally hung up, Claire sat in her Tokyo apartment and felt something she hadn't felt in years. Hope. Real, terrifying, exhilarating hope. The month passed in a blur of packing and paperwork and goodbyes. Claire trained her replacement, a sharp woman from Seoul who reminded Claire of herself 6 months ago, hungry and capable and ready to prove it. She had dinner with the team members who'd become friends. She walked through Tokyo one last time, saying goodbye to the city that had rebuilt her. Her mother handled the transition with characteristic grace, excited about New York in a way that made Claire's heart ache. Dr. Sato had arranged everything with a colleague at Mount Sinai. Her treatments would continue without interruption. I'm proud of you, her mother said on their last night in Tokyo, for choosing what you want instead of what's safe. I learned from the best. They flew back across the Pacific on a Wednesday in September, when New York was just starting to hint at autumn. Adrian met them at JFK. Claire saw him before he saw her, standing near baggage claim, hands in his pockets, looking nervous in a way that made him seem younger. Then his eyes found hers, and his entire face changed. He didn't run, didn't make a scene, just walked over with purpose and stopped about 2 feet away. Hi, he said. Hi. They stared at each other for a beat too long. Then Adrian seemed to remember his manners and turned to Claire's mother. Mrs. Bennett, I'm Adrian Cole. It's an honor to meet you. Call me Patricia. Her mother shook his hand, then gave Claire a look that said, we'll talk about this later, before diplomatically going to retrieve their luggage. Which left Claire and Adrian standing in the middle of JFK, surrounded by strangers and announcements and the chaotic energy of people going places. You're really here, Adrian said. I'm really here. For a year. At least. And we're going to, what, date? See if this works? Claire smiled. Something like that. I'm terrible at dating. Haven't done it since college. I'm terrible at it too. Matthew's going to want to be involved in everything. He doesn't have boundaries yet. I like Matthew. My company's still a disaster. I work 80-hour weeks. I work 90. Adrian stepped closer. I'm going to mess this up. Probably. You're okay with that? Claire thought about her mother's words. About there being no right time, just the time you have, and what you choose to do with it. Yeah, she said, I'm okay with that. Adrian kissed her right there in the arrivals terminal at JFK, and it was awkward and perfect and exactly what Claire needed. When they pulled apart, her mother was standing nearby with their luggage, trying not to smile. Should we get going? Patricia asked. Or would you two like more time to make a scene? Claire laughed. We can go. The apartment Tanaka Global had arranged was in Tribeca, 3 blocks from Adrian's building. It wasn't as nice as Claire's Tokyo place, but it had character. Exposed brick, high ceilings, windows that let in actual sunlight. Patricia disappeared into her room almost immediately, claiming jet lag, but probably just giving them space. Adrian helped Claire unpack, which mostly involved him standing uselessly in the middle of the room while she organized things. Matthew wants to have you over for dinner tomorrow, he said, if you're not too tired. I'd like that. He's been planning the menu for a week. It's going to be a disaster. I'm sure it'll be great. He's 9. His idea of a menu is pizza and ice cream. Sounds perfect. Adrian caught her hand as she walked past. I'm really glad you're here. Me too. Even though my company's still a mess and my apartment's too small, and I have a kid who's going to monopolize all your time, Claire turned to face him fully, especially because of all that. The dinner with Matthew was exactly the disaster Adrian had predicted, and somehow wonderful anyway. Matthew had indeed made pizza from scratch, which meant there was flour everywhere and the crust was simultaneously burnt and undercooked. He'd also made a Japanese dish that he'd learned from YouTube, which was unidentifiable but endearing. This is amazing, Claire lied, gamely eating the mystery food. Matthew beamed. Really? Really? She's lying, Adrian said, but it's very sweet of her. Dad! They ate the terrible food and played board games that Matthew won through a combination of skill and creative rule interpretation. He showed Claire his Japanese workbooks, proud of his progress. She corrected his pronunciation gently and watched his face light up when he got things right. Around 9, Matthew fell asleep on the couch mid-game, exhausted from excitement. Adrian carried him to bed, and when he came back, he found Claire cleaning up the kitchen. You don't have to do that, he said. I want to. They cleaned in comfortable silence, moving around each other like they'd been doing this for years instead of hours. When the kitchen was mostly clean, Adrian poured them both wine and they sat on his balcony overlooking the city. This is really happening, Adrian said quietly. Yeah. You moved across the world on the chance that something between us might work. I moved across the world for a job, Claire corrected. The chance of something working between us was just a bonus. A bonus? A very significant bonus. Adrian smiled. I waited 6 months to ask you this question. Ask it. He turned to face her fully. Do you want to build something with me? Knowing it's going to be messy and complicated and probably harder than either of us expects? Claire thought about everything that had led them here. About a dinner at Monarch where she'd found courage she didn't know she had. About Emiko destroying men with quiet precision. About Matthew learning Japanese to impress someone who'd yelled at his principal. About her mother choosing life over fear. Yes, she said simply. Just like that? Just like that. Adrian kissed her again, slower this time, and Manhattan glittered below them like a promise. 6 months later, the Mark 7 water purification system won an International Engineering Award. Claire stood backstage at the ceremony, watching Adrian accept the award with Sarah Chen and the rest of his team. He looked different than he had a year ago, less exhausted, more present, like he'd finally stopped running from grief and learned to live alongside it. His speech was short and honest. He thanked his team, thanked Tanaka Global for believing in them, thanked his son for reminding him why the work mattered. Then he looked directly at Claire and said, And I want to thank someone who taught me that silence is a choice, that standing up matters even when it's hard, that courage doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it's just a person doing the right thing when no one's watching. Claire felt tears prick her eyes. Later, at the reception, Emiko appeared at her elbow. "He's very in love with you," Emiko observed. "I know." "Are you in love with him?" Claire watched Adrian across the room, laughing with Matthew, who'd insisted on coming to the ceremony in a suit 3 sizes too big. "Yeah," she said. "I am." "Good." Emiko sipped her champagne. "You deserve happiness, Claire. Both kinds. The kind you build yourself and the kind other people give you." "Thank you for everything. You earned it. All of it." Emiko paused. "Though I do miss having you in Tokyo." "I miss it too sometimes, but I'm where I need to be." "I know. That's why I'm not trying to convince you to come back." They stood together for a moment, 2 women who'd found each other in a moment of crisis and built something worth keeping. Then Matthew ran over, dragging Adrian behind him. "Claire, did you see Dad's speech? He totally mentioned you." "I saw." "Was it embarrassing?" Claire looked at Adrian, who was trying very hard not to smile. "A little," she admitted, "but in a good way." "Cool." Matthew tugged on her hand. "Come on, there's food, and I promise it's better than the pizza I made." Claire let herself be dragged toward the buffet, Adrian following behind, and Emiko watching them all with quiet satisfaction. A year ago, Claire had been a waitress serving people who didn't see her, had been invisible by necessity and design. Now she was building water purification systems that saved lives, was raising a 9-year-old who wasn't hers but felt like it anyway, was falling in love with a man who'd learned to stand up when it mattered. None of it was perfect. Adrian still worked too much. Matthew still had nightmares about losing his mother. Claire's mother's cancer was in remission, but the fear never fully disappeared. The company still struggled some months, still made decisions that hurt. But they were building something worth building. And in the end, Claire had learned that's what mattered. Not the perfect outcome. Not the fairy tale ending, just the daily choice to show up, stand up, and try to be better than you were yesterday. Sometimes courage was grand gestures and dramatic confrontations, but mostly it was smaller than that. Quieter. It was translating cruelty when you could have stayed silent. It was offering someone a chance when everyone else had given up. It was moving across the world because maybe, just maybe, something good was waiting on the other side. It was choosing to be seen when being invisible felt safer. And as Claire stood in that reception hall, watching Matthew explain engineering concepts to people 3 times his age, while Adrian watched with obvious pride, she realized something fundamental. She'd spent so long trying to be invisible that she'd forgotten the point of being seen wasn't to avoid getting hurt. It was to connect, to matter, to leave the world slightly better than you found it. That night, after the ceremony, after the reception, after they dropped and exhausted Matthew off with Rosa, Adrian and Claire walked through Manhattan in the September dark. "I have something to ask you," Adrian said as they reached her building. "Okay. Move in with me. You and your mother. My apartment's small, but we could find something bigger. Something that fits all of us." Claire's heart stuttered. "That's fast." "I know, and if you need more time—" "I don't need more time," Claire smiled. "I just wanted to hear you say it was fast, to make sure you knew what you were asking. I'm asking you to build a life with me, a real one, with my disaster of a son and your mother and whatever chaos comes next. When you put it that way, how can I refuse?" Adrian laughed and kissed her right there on the street, and Claire thought about that first dinner at Monarch, about how everything had started with her choosing to speak when silence would have been easier. 6 months later, they moved into a brownstone in Brooklyn with enough room for all of them and Matthew's growing collection of engineering projects. A year after that, Claire's mother went into full remission. 2 years after that, Coal Industries was profitable and expanding. And through it all, Claire kept Emiko's business card in her wallet, right next to the one Adrian had given her at Monarch. Reminders that sometimes the most important thing you can do is see people, really see them, when everyone else is looking away. That silence is always a choice, and that courage doesn't have to be loud to change everything.